Hi guys! Tonight we wander back into a world where winter storms rule the night, and a log cabin stands as your only shield against whatever the dark decides to throw at you. You push open the cabin door and step into a breath of smoky warmth, boots heavy with snow air buzzing with the promise of a storm rolling across the early 1800s frontier. Outside, the sky's already turning that deep slate colour that means trouble. Inside, everything creaks in the quiet hush before the wind arrives. And you standing there brushing the cold from your sleeves probably would not survive this for more than a week. But for the families who lived out here, this was simply another evening. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights and let your imagination take over as you settle into the narrow space where the storm is just beginning its approach, brushing the world with its icy fingers. You push the door closed behind you. The latch clicks into place with that familiar wooden clack that always feels a little flimsy compared to the weight of the world outside. At this moment the storm is still only a whisper. A soft hiss moves across the roof, almost polite. You shrug off your outer coat and feel the first waft of warm cabin air curling around your neck. It smells like smoke, dried herbs, wool, and something faintly animal. Even now, the air is never quite clean. You notice that in a winter log cabin, there is always at least one scent hanging around that you cannot place. Maybe it's the dampness of snow melting from your boots, or the lingering memory of last night's stew. One mainstream historical fact is that many frontier homes relied on a single-room layout because it was faster to build and easier to heat. You feel those choices immediately. Every smell, every sound, every breath lives together in the same square of space. You look up and see the cabin walls around you. Rough logs stacked horizontally, gaps filled with a mixture of mud and straw that was never perfect. Some cracks have widened since last winter. Some are newly patched, but you can still spot the ones just waiting for a freezing night to pry them open. You run your hand along a ridge in the wood. It feels coarse, splintered, but sturdy in its own rugged way. You sense the cabin almost breathing. The cold outside presses inward. The warm inside pushes outward. The logs expand and contract as the wind shifts. This tiny building behaves like a living creature that tolerates you more than protects you. You move toward the window. It is nothing like a modern window, just oiled paper stretched across a wooden frame. If you press too hard, it might tear. Light shimmers through it in a blurry glow. You lean close and listen. The storm is gathering, drawing in a long breath. Snowflakes tap against the paper like fingertips. A quirky tidbit that many people do not know is that some frontier families stuffed spare socks between the window frame and the wall to block drafts. You reach for the sill, thinking about whether you should add more cloth before the wind turns harsher. Behind you, the fire crackles in the hearth. You feel its warmth gently tugging at your chilled skin. The logs burn irregularly, glowing red around the edges, releasing little pops of sap. Even with the fire going, you know the cabin will never be truly warm. Not tonight. Maybe not until late spring. Historians still argue whether early settlers underestimated just how brutal North American winters could be. Some say they learned quickly and adapted through shared knowledge. Others believe many families barely scrape through their first cold season, improvising more than planning. You glance around at the simple furnishings. A rough table, a couple of stools, maybe a rocking chair that is losing one spindle. A shelf with a few tin cups. Everything looks handmade because it is. You pick up one of the cups and feel how cold the metal is even inside the cabin. The storm has not even begun in full yet, and already the cold is creeping in like a bold visitor who does not wait for an invitation. A soft thud overhead draws your attention, a bit of snow sliding off the roof. Or maybe the wind shifting the shingles. You listen, head tilted, waiting. The roof made of shakes and packed branches always feels a little questionable during the first storm of the season. You think about how families in the 1800s often rebuilt or reinforced roofs every year just to survive the winter. You wonder whether this one will hold. You hope so. The idea of going outside to repair anything right now makes your shoulders tense automatically. You walk over to hang your coat on a peg. The fabric is stiff with cold. You brush off a few clumps of snow and they drop onto the floorboards where they melt, slowly darkening the wood. You can feel the boards underneath your feet. They creak differently in winter, almost brittle. Everything around you seems to be holding its breath. The wind picks up outside. Just a little. Enough for you to hear the first low moan against the cabin walls. A thin draft slips through a place where the chinking has loosened. You put your hand in front of the gap and feel the icy air sliding through with intention. You think to yourself that you really should patch that spot with cloth later. But right now you are tired from the long day. You will get to it eventually. That is the thought everyone has before a storm teaches them otherwise. You move a little closer to the fire, letting its heat wrap around your hands. The flames flicker like they are whispering encouragement, or maybe warning. Fire always has that double nature in a cabin. Without it, you would freeze. Too much of it, and the whole place goes up instantly. You sit on the stool nearest to it, and for a moment the world feels manageable. Outside, the snow begins to fall harder. You hear the soft but persistent hiss as the flakes settle on the roof. Then the breeze stiffens into a steady wind that pushes at the cabin like a large creature testing your defences. You close your eyes and listen. The rhythm of it is strangely soothing. A storm is dangerous, yes, but it also has a kind of hypnotic pulse that pulls you inward into your own warmth and breath. You think about how those families long ago faced nights like this, over and over, year after year. Some of them sat exactly like you are now, leaning toward a dim fire, hoping the logs would last until morning. Others slept in shifts to protect the flame. Some families even brought hot stones from the hearth to their beds to take a bit of warmth under the quilts. That old trick crosses your mind as you watch the firelight flash across the room. The cabin shakes again with a gust of wind more insistent this time. The storm is here, fully awake. Outside, the world is disappearing into white. Inside, you're settling deeper into the night, knowing that everything from now until dawn will be shaped by this strange, uneasy dance with the winter cold. You take one more slow breath and let your shoulders drop. Whatever comes next, you will face it in this little cabin of logs and stubborn hope. And the storm, whispering at first, now begins to speak more loudly, promising a long night ahead. You stay seated near the fire for a moment, listening as the wind outside grows bolder. The cabin walls begin to respond in that familiar way you felt the moment you walked in. They shift softly. They sigh. They almost groan as if each timber remembers every storm that came before this one and is preparing itself for another long night of endurance. You run your palm over your knee and stand slowly, letting your boots press into the uneven floorboards. You walk toward one of the side walls and place your fingertips against the logs. You can actually feel a faint vibration from the gusts that slam into the cabin. It is like standing beside a sleeping animal with a heartbeat that is steady but a little strained. The logs are cool to the touch, not icy since the fire has been burning for hours, but cool enough that your fingers recoil instinctively. The structure around you feels both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it is your only shelter. Unsettling because you know deep down how fragile it truly is. One mainstream historical fact is that most frontier log cabins were built with green wood that had not fully dried, which meant the logs shrank and shifted for months after construction. You can feel the consequences every winter. Those shrinking gaps become little tunnels for wind snow dust, and sometimes even small creatures looking for warmth. You stand still and listen closely. The cabin is talking to you in its own quiet language. A slow groan as the wind presses the western wall. A soft crack somewhere near the roof line. A faint tapping that is probably a loose shingle flapping under pressure. And beneath all of that, the steady creak of timbers adjusting themselves, flexing but not breaking. A quirky tidbit you might not expect is that some families intentionally wedge dried corn cobs between logs for insulation, claiming the shape helped them stay put better during winter storms. You glance at a few chinking patches and wonder if someone tried that here long before you arrived. You take a small step back and let your shoulders lean gently against the wall. You feel the cabin sway just enough for your body to catch the movement. Not a dramatic shift. More of a tiny nod forward. Historians still argue whether cabins like this were safer because they flex with the wind, or whether the movement signaled structural weakness that could turn dangerous if a storm lasted long enough. You prefer to believe flexibility is a good sign. After all, a stiff unmoving building might crack under the same pressure that a slightly wiggling log cabin can survive. Another gust slams into the side harder this time. The window frame shivers. The oiled paper rattles like a drum skin. If you were outside, the storm would already be difficult to walk through. But in here, it is all muffled. The logs absorb the worst of it, leaving you with a softened version of the chaos outside. You close your eyes for a moment and breathe in the scent of smoke and heated pine resin. It reminds you that this place was built with human hands, often under pressure, yet meant to stand against nature for years. You crouch and look closely at a seam where two logs meet. The chinking is cracked in a few places. You can see where someone pressed more material in recently, maybe after the last storm weakened it. A tiny bead of cold air slips through and brushes your cheek. It is sharp enough to remind you that every weak spot matters. The cold outside is not satisfied with knocking politely. It is already sneaking into the room, one hairline opening at a time. You rise and step closer to the fire again, letting its warmth soothe your fingers. The flames flicker in the draught from that tiny gap you just inspected. Even the fire seems to notice the weakness in the wall. You kneel briefly and toss another log into the hearth. It catches slowly, reluctant at first. The fresh wood smokes before igniting and the smoky scent curls around your head. You blink a few times as your eyes adjust. Then you hear it. A long, low whine of wind sliding across the roof. Not the familiar short gusts. This one is steady and deep, the kind of sound that makes you imagine the storm settling in for a long stay. The cabin reacts immediately. The rafters creak overhead like old bones stretching. A faint shower of dust sifts down from between the shake shingles. You watch it drift in the firelight before settling on the floor. You move to the centre of the room and listen again. Every storm has its own personality. Some roar from the beginning, some start quiet, then erupt later. This one seems to want you to know that it is fully awake now, but not yet showing its full force. The sound of it is almost rhythmic. A low hum, a sudden thrum, a quick tremor. The atmosphere inside grows heavier as the pressure outside changes. Your ears feel it. Your breath feels it. Even your heartbeat slows a little as you settle into the strange calm that storms often bring. You step back toward the wall, almost drawn to the vibrations. You imagine the logs were cut from trees that might have stood for decades before becoming part of this cabin. Trees that survived storms of their own. Trees that once bent under winter winds and now hold your little shelter together. You think about how frontier builders often chose pine or oak, because they could be notched easily and held their shape well. But no matter how carefully selected, these logs are old now. Weathered, cracked in places, and yet they stand. A sudden crack echoes from the corner where two walls meet. You turn your head quickly listening. Probably the wood expanding as the temperature drops. Maybe a knot inside the log reacting to the pressure. Nothing unusual, but still enough to make your stomach tighten for a second. Living in a log cabin during a storm means never fully relaxing. The place keeps reminding you that it is not indestructible. You walk slowly across the room, touching the walls as you go. Each beam has a slightly different texture. Some smoother, some rougher, some bulging, outward a little where age has warped them. The moonlight tries to push through the paper window, but only manages a pale smear of illumination. If you press your ear against the wall, you hear the storm more clearly. Snow pellets tapping, branches brushing, the wind keening around the corners of the structure. Your breath escapes in a slow sigh. You feel small inside this box of wood and clay, yet at the same time you feel strangely connected to everyone who ever stood inside a place like this, listening to winter howl just outside their thin shell of protection. Maybe you even understand why cabin families often decorated their walls with herbs, charms, or carved patterns. Not just for beauty, but to make the space feel more alive and reassuring. You walk back to the hearth again, letting the fire warm your face. Behind you, the walls settle into a quieter rhythm. The storm continues, but the cabin adjusts. The sounds blend into a steady background of creaking timber and distant swirling snow. For a moment you close your eyes and simply feel it. The living, breathing presence of the walls around you, the cold pushing in, the heat pushing out, the delicate balance that defines every winter night in a log cabin on the frontier. You stand near the fire a little longer, savouring the warmth before curiosity pulls you toward the darker corners of the cabin. The storm outside is still building strength, and you can hear it in the long rising breath of the wind. You take a slow step toward the far wall where the shadows gather, and almost immediately a thin ribbon of cold air brushes across your ankles. It snakes along the floor with purpose. It seems alive. It reminds you that in a log cabin during a winter storm, the chill does not politely wait by the door. It hunts for you. You crouch down and place your hand a few inches above the floorboards. The air there is noticeably colder. Much colder. You pull your coat tighter even though you're indoors. You feel the contrast between the upper half of the room warmed by the hearth and the lower half where your breath almost forms frost if you crouch for too long. One mainstream historical fact is that cabins often had uneven temperatures because heat rose quickly and drafts swept along the ground like invisible rivers of ice. Children often slept on elevated platforms or straw mattresses for that very reason. You stand again and move your hand across the nearby wall. Every ridge and groove in the wood seems to exhale its own little puff of winter. Your skin prickles. You can feel the cold reaching for you, even through the layers of your clothing. The storm has not even peaked yet, and already it is creeping through gaps you had not noticed earlier. You walk toward a place where two logs meet, and see a sliver of pale light shining through. The wind pushes a bit of snow dust through the crack, and the tiny crystals sparkle before melting on the floor. You whisper to yourself that you need to fix that soon. A quirky tidbit many people have never heard is that settlers sometimes hung animal pelts directly on the interior walls to help block drafts. Not for decoration, but simply because fur was one of the few materials that could stop cold air effectively. You glance at the small pelt draped near the window. It sways slightly as the air slips around it, trying to find a way inside. You turn away from the wall and look toward your bed. Not a modern bed, of course. Just a simple frame stuffed with straw and covered in quilts that look heavy enough to smother you if they fell the wrong way. You walk over and press your hand against the bedding. It feels cool but not icy, which is comforting. Still, you know from experience that once you climb under those quilts, the cold will sneak in around your shoulders no matter how tightly you tuck the edges. The draft around you grows stronger, sweeping lightly across your shins as you take another step. The cabin is no longer pretending to hold the warmth. It is beginning the nightly battle to keep the cold at bay, and you are part of that battle. You take a slow breath and watch the firelight flicker across the walls. The logs glow softly, their edges catching the fire in thin golden lines that seem to move as the wind presses and releases. Historians still argue whether settlers mastered the art of insulation, or simply accepted that cabins would always be drafty no matter what. Some scholars claim that families layered moss and mud meticulously to block every gap. Others insist that most cabins leaked constantly, and people adapted by wearing more layers rather than improving the walls. As you feel cold fingers of air sliding across your wrists, now you find yourself leaning toward that second opinion. You step toward the centre of the room again. The wind outside begins to shriek, not in a sudden violent way, but in a long rising pitch that sends a soft tremor through the floorboards. You lift one foot and place it down slowly, listening to the hollow sound beneath you. You imagine the crawl space below filled with brittle air and maybe a few small animals seeking refuge. The gap between the ground and the cabin is a cold reservoir. It sends chilling air up between the floor planks, especially during storms when wind pressure changes rapidly. You crouch again and run your hand along the edge of the floor by the far wall. You feel a steady flow of cold air streaming upward. It feels almost intentional. You think about how some families stuffed rags between the planks to help slow the draft, even though it never truly solved the problem. You consider doing that now, but the storm is gaining strength, and you decide the chore can wait until the fire has burned lower. As you stand, you shiver involuntarily. The cold in the cabin has deepened, curling around your wrists and tugging at your collar. You move back toward the fire, drawn by instinct, much like anyone living in a cabin 2 centuries ago would be. The hearth is your lifeline. Without it, the night becomes a threat rather than a challenge. You kneel on the warm stones and stretch your hands toward the glowing embers. The heat travels up your arms and melts the stiffness from your fingers. But as you enjoy that reprieve, another gust rattles the shutters. The window trembles. The oiled paper flutters in and out, creating a soft, thrumming sound. It reminds you of a heartbeat. You glance over and watch the frame shift minutely with each gust. You step closer and feel the cold radiating off the surface, even without touching it. You rest your palm lightly against the wooden frame and hold it there. The vibration from the storm moves directly into your bones. You feel connected to the wind outside, as if the storm itself has reached through the cabin walls to remind you of its power. The paper crackles a little and balloons inward when a strong gust hits. You take a brief steadying breath. You know that if the wind tears that paper, the cold will rush in instantly. You will have to repair it in the middle of the storm with numb fingers and dim firelight. You move away from the window and rub your arms to bring the warmth back. The chill seems to cling to you even as you cross the room. You feel it on your shoulders. You feel it reaching up your spine. You feel it slipping around your calves and ankles again, testing you the way the wind tests the cabin walls. You pull your coat from the peg and wrap it around yourself even though you're indoors. The fabric is still cold, but it traps a little warmth. You hold it close and let your breath form small clouds in front of you. The storm outside howls, with a deeper voice, now low and long, almost like a distant horn played by the wind. Snow taps against the roof in a pattern that grows heavier by the minute. You sit on your bed slowly and let the mattress sag under your weight. The straw shifts beneath you. It rustles softly, a sound that blends with the wind outside in an oddly pleasant way. You lean back a little and exhale your breath rising in a faint mist. You can feel the cold creeping through the quilts as if it's searching for you. But the fire is still burning, the cabin is still standing, and you are still here watching your breath shimmer in the dim light as the storm outside reaches for the night with icy determination. You sit on the edge of the bed for a long moment, listening to the fire sputter and the wind clawing gently at the walls. The flames are beginning to shrink, growing orange around the edges and fading to a deeper red toward the center. You rise reluctantly and walk toward the hearth, knowing that tending the fire is the only thing standing between you and a night of breath turning to frost on your eyelashes. You kneel and feel the warmth touch your face. It is soft but determined, like an old friend doing its best with very little. You watch a log collapse inward with a soft sigh as its core burns away. Sparks shift and drift upward. The fire looks tired, as if the storm outside is draining it, just as much as it drains you. You reach for a split piece of wood you had set aside earlier. The bark feels rough, dusted with lingering snow from when you brought in the last armload. You place it carefully onto the embers, angling it so air can travel beneath. You wait. The edges of the bark curl first. Then the wood turns a slow, smouldering black, before catching with a faint crackle. As the flames build, you pull your hands closer. The heat pulses outward in waves, but it never quite reaches the far corners of the cabin. One well-established detail from frontier life is that fireplaces in small log homes rarely heated a space evenly. People would often huddle close, leaving the rest of the room only slightly warmer than the outdoors. You feel the truth of that now, the way the warmth weakens after just a few steps away. You stand and stretch your back, hearing it pop faintly in the quiet. The firelight dances across the room, spreading orange glimmers on the tools leaning against the wall. You glance at the wooden poker someone carved years ago. You do not know who carved it. Maybe someone who lived here before you. Maybe someone who sat by this same fire during another storm and worried about the same things you do now. That thought lingers in your chest for a moment before you return to the task in front of you. You walk to the small wood pile stacked beside the hearth. You lift one log, then another. They're heavier than you expect, still holding a bit of inner moisture. You can almost hear a faint hiss when you place them by the fire, like the wood is complaining before surrendering to the heat. A lesser-known bit of frontier lore claims that some families deliberately stored a few pieces of damp wood to create longer-lasting embers at night, though that trick was far from perfect and often filled the cabin with eye-stinging smoke. You wonder if the logs you're using tonight came from a pile stored under a leaky roof corner. A sudden gust outside sends a strong vibration through the wall. The fire shivers. You pause poker in hand and listen to the world beyond the cabin. The wind tears across the roof and roars through the trees with a voice that is both wild and strangely rhythmic. It is a sound you feel in your ribs. The fire responds with a flicker that is almost defensive. You wonder briefly if the storm notices your little flame and finds it amusing. You take a long breath and poke at the burning logs. Embers tumble inward, glowing like tiny molten stones. Heat rises up your arms in soft waves. For a second you let yourself lean into it, eyelids, heavy shoulders dropping as warmth sinks into your muscles. You could fall asleep right here, lulled by the crackle and glow, but you know better. The fire needs watching. It always needs watching. You shift a few more pieces of wood, building a heartier flame. Red embers catch at the edges, spreading slowly. You brush some stray ash from your sleeve and back away from the hearth, satisfied for now. The warmth clings to you as you walk, but the moment you cross the midpoint of the room, the chill rises again, reminding you that heat is a temporary victory. The air past the fire's reach feels like it has teeth small and sharp, nipping at your skin. You glance toward the ceiling where a faint thread of smoke weaves upward toward the opening in the chimney. You tilt your head slightly. The draw is steady, but you know how quickly that can change on a stormy night. Scholars of early American domestic life have long disagreed about whether drafty cabins helped smoke escape more easily, or whether those same leaks made it harder to maintain a clean upward pull. Tonight, as you watch the smoke sway in thin, uncertain ribbons, the debate seems far from settled. A pop from the fire snaps your attention back. A small coal leaps outward and lands just shy of the hearthstone. You step quickly and nudge it back with the poker, pressing until it hisses and dies. You can imagine what one tiny burning ember could do to a cabin built entirely of wood, straw and hope. The fear lingers in the back of your mind, a small persistent knot of caution. You add a few chips of kindling around the base of the new logs, encouraging the flames to rise higher. The heat swells again, warming your cheeks, thawing your fingertips. The fire does not roar. It never roars in a cabin this small. Instead it hums. A soft, steady melody of burning wood and shifting embers. You find the sound reassuring, like a mantra that tells you things are under control even when they clearly are not. You sit back on your heels and look around the room. The shadows move restlessly along the walls as the fire grows brighter. The storm outside rumbles softly, a low vibration carried through the ground and into the timbers. Snow blasts against the cabin with renewed force. You imagine the drifts climbing higher, creeping up the sides like icy fingers trying to reach inside. But the fire pushes back with its quiet persistence. You return to the bed and sit down again, wrapping a quilt around your shoulders. The warmth from the hearth reaches you only faintly, now brushing the edges of your skin but not sinking in deeply. Still, it is enough to keep you from shivering. You draw the quilt tighter, pulling its worn fabric close. The stitching is uneven, the colours faded. Whoever made it did so with practicality rather than beauty in mind, yet you feel grateful for every patch and thread. As the fire continues its slow and steady work, the storm begins to settle into a rhythm. Wind pours, wind again. Snow, then silence, then snow, returning with twice the force. The cabin stretches and creaks as if reminding you that it is still awake too. You breathe slowly, matching the pattern of the flames, letting the warmth touch your thoughts, even as the cold waits along the edges of the room. The fire will need tending again soon, you know that. But for now you sit with the quilt wrapped tight, listening to the storm test the cabin, while your fragile little flame holds its ground. You pull the quilt around your shoulders and slowly rise again, drawn toward the place where you will eventually try to sleep. The bedstead waits in the dim light, a crude but familiar shape in the far corner of the cabin. The fire sends faint flickers of orange across it, illuminating the uneven posts and the roughly tied frame. You walk toward it at an unhurried pace, your boots making soft thuds on the chilled floorboards. With every step you can feel the contrast between the warm air near your face and the cold sneaking up from the ground, searching for your ankles. When you reach the bed, you run your hand along the wooden rail. It is splintered in places smoother than others, as if several generations of hands have gripped it during long winter nights. The frame wobbles just a little when you lean on it. Deep down you know that sturdiness was not the priority here. Speed of construction was. One widely known piece of frontier reality is that most families built bed frames quickly, from whatever wood they had on hand, shaping branches, planks and leftover scraps into something that could lift a sleeper off the brutally cold floor. You kneel to inspect the straw mattress. When you press your palm into it, it gives only a little, then crunches softly under your weight. Some of the stalks are stiff and brittle, others still hold a bit of life from the last harvest. You adjust the quilt pile and lift one corner of the bedding to peek beneath. Bits of grass, stray hulls, and a few small feathers cling to the fabric. The mattress is lumpier than is ideal, but you know it insulates better like this than if it were evenly flat. You pat the surface gently, thinking that comfort in a cabin was often a matter of accepting whatever the earth provided. You pull one of the heavy quilts back and shake it lightly. A puff of dust floats upward and shimmers in the firelight before drifting toward the floor. The quilt smells faintly of smoke and farm animals and something like dried flowers. An unusual little detail from rural homes of this time is that some people tucked lavender or dried mint inside their quilts to mask the scent of straw and sweat. You wonder if this one once held something fragrant, though now it carries more of the cabin's stories than the herbs that may have been sewn into its seams. You drape the quilt again and sit gently on the edge of the bed. The wooden frame groans under your weight, not in protest, but in recognition. You shift from side to side, testing how well the straw adjusts. It pokes in a few places and sags in others, but it feels warm enough. Warm for a winter cabin means tolerable, not cozy. You lean back on your hands and glance across the room. The fire is still glowing steadily, though the flames have settled into a lazy dance. As you listen to the storm, you notice the wind redirecting itself. It hurls snow against the northern wall in a sudden burst, then slides across the cabin roof with a long scraping sigh. You feel the bed shake faintly, just enough to make you reach for the quilt beside you. You pull the top layer over your legs and exhale into the dimly lit space. Your breath rises as a pale cloud before fading into the air. You stretch out your legs and adjust the straw beneath you. It rustles like dry leaves. You pat the bedding again, trying to decide where you might place your head later. The pillow, if you can call it that, is a cloth sack stuffed with leftover rags and bits of wool. You pick it up, squeeze it, and hear the fabrics shifting around inside. It holds its shape only reluctantly. You set the pillow back down and lie across the bed for a moment, testing the feel of it on your spine. A faint crunch meets your ear as the straw shifts under your shoulder. You look up at the rafters overhead, dim and shadowed. The roof above them creaks in a way that makes you hope the storm will not send any stray snowmelt dripping through the shingles before morning. Some historians are unsure whether early settlers preferred tightly packed rafters or more widely spaced beams for better ventilation, and you feel that uncertainty reflected above you in the dark gaps between the wood. You sit up again and rub your hands together for warmth. The cold is creeping deeper into the cabin now. It curls around your elbows, slips behind your knees, and gathers around your fingertips. You pull the quilts toward you and begin arranging them, layering them with the kind of attention you only learn through harsh winters. You tuck one corner under the straw, weigh down another with the pillow, and smooth the top until it looks like it might trap at least some of the heat when the time comes to lie beneath it. The fire pops again, sending a brief spark upward. You glance over your shoulder and release a quiet sigh. That sound is a reminder that sleep will not come easily. Not in a storm like this. Not with the cold pushing in through every crack like a persistent visitor. You adjust the quilts once more, pressing the edges firmly against the mattress so no wandering gust can slip underneath. You lean forward and rest your elbows on your knees. The bed feels more inviting now, though still firm in the way straw beds always are. You look around at the dim room, its shadows wrapping themselves along the logs. Everything seems to shiver a little with the wind. You pull the pillow closer and rest it on your lap for warmth. Its fabric is coarse beneath your fingers, but familiar enough to be comforting in its rough honesty. Another blast of snow hits the cabin wall. The impact sends a faint vibration through the bedstead. You breathe slowly, accepting the reality of the night. The storm is not going anywhere. Neither are you. You lift one quilt and tuck it over your feet again, letting the fabric rest across your ankles. The bed might not be soft and the cabin might not be warm, but the combination of the two offers a kind of fragile security. You sit with the bedding gathered around you, letting the fire whisper behind you, while the storm circles the cabin with restless energy. Little by little, the space around the bed feels like its own small shelter. Within the shelter, a place where you might eventually drift into sleep if the cold grants you permission. You stay seated on the edge of the bed for a moment longer, the quilt draped over your knees while you listen to the storm outside growing heavier by the minute. The sound of the wind no longer feels like a distant threat. It presses against the cabin walls in long, forceful sighs as if the sky itself has leaned down to exhale across the landscape. You lift your head slightly, noticing how the rhythm of the weather has changed. The snow has begun piling higher, and you can hear it in the density of each blow against the logs. It has weight now, weight that settles, shifts and builds. You rise slowly and move toward the window. The faint square of oiled paper glows with a blurred white light, the kind that comes from thousands of snowflakes swirling together so thickly that the world becomes one solid colour. When you lean close, you hear a muted hiss. The storm is brushing the cabin with steady hands, layering it with powder that will soon drift high enough to meet the windowsill. You place your fingertips gently on the frame. It is cold enough to sting. You pull back and shake your hand lightly, letting your breath warm your skin. You step away from the window and listen more carefully. The wind does not rush in wild bursts now. It moves in heavy waves, pressing snow across the roof, sliding drifts along the ground, and packing every crevice with icy determination. You imagine the cabin slowly sinking into a mound of white. In the early 1800s, many families actually welcomed deep snowfall, because thick drifts insulated the lower logs, keeping some warmth trapped inside. That practical truth settles into your awareness as you feel the cold nibbling at your shoulders. The storm may be overwhelming, but part of it is working in your favour. You step toward the door, curiosity pulling you closer, even though every instinct warns you not to open it. You place your ear against the wood. The sound on the other side is thick and muffled, like listening through a pillow. Snow is piling heavily now, sliding against the door in slow dragging motions. You imagine the landscape disappearing beneath it. The path you walked earlier is already gone. The trees you passed are probably white columns coated with hours of frost. You move back to the centre of the room and hug your arms around yourself. The temperature has dropped again. You can feel the cold radiating from the floor as if the earth itself is sighing upward. The storm presses more insistently. The cabin answers back with creaks and groans that sound older than the logs themselves. The noise is not alarming, but it makes you aware of every beam, every joint, every choice the builder made decades ago. You walk to the hearth and hold your hands over the flames. The firelight dances, casting warm streaks along your wrists and palms. Your skin prickles with relief. You feed the fire another small piece of wood, watching it catch with a slow glow. You know that the deeper the snow becomes outside, the more important this flame will be. Snow may insulate the walls, but it also traps heat and smoke, inside if the chimney draft changes. Some frontier diaries describe nights when families had to crack the door open during blizzards just to let smoke escape properly. You tell yourself you will watch the chimney carefully tonight. You sit on the floor near the hearth, pulling a small rug beneath you to buffer the chill. The cabin trembles as a fresh gust deposits another sheet of snow against the side. You feel the pressure through the floorboards. It is not frightening, but it is a reminder that nature is stacking itself against your walls inch by inch. You close your eyes, briefly imagining the shape of the cabin from the outside. A tiny wooden box half buried in swirling white, holding one fragile pocket of warmth. When you reopen your eyes, the firelight flickers brightly, catching on the iron tools leaning against the stones. The shadows cast by the flames stretch long and uneven, bending across the walls, as if trying to escape the cold creeping in from every direction. You shift your weight and settle a little closer to the fire. The warmth unfurls across your face, soothing and steady. You rub your palms together to bring more heat into your fingertips. Your skin feels tight from the cold, but the fire helps loosen it. You lean back on your hands and listen to the cabin breathe under the increasing weight of the storm. The drifts climbing the walls have begun to soften the sound of the wind. Everything is becoming quieter, in a way that is eerie, but strangely comforting. Deep snow can muffle the world so thoroughly that you feel cut off from everything except your own breath and the crackling of the fire. You tilt your head toward the roof. Snow is sliding across it, landing in thick packs that make the entire structure feel heavier. You imagine the chimney rising through the white layers, struggling to release smoke upward. You glance at the faint plume drifting up from the fire, making sure it still pulls in the right direction. It wavers a little, swaying left then right before rising straight again. You feel a small knot of tension loosen. You stand and walk back to the window. The white blur outside swirls with a slow, dizzying motion. If you stare too long, it feels like the world is spinning while you remain perfectly still. You touch the edge of the frame again and feel another shiver of cold. The snowdrift outside must be nearly level with the window by now. You picture it pressing softly against the cabin wall, climbing your little home like a patient creature, determined to wrap it completely. You turn toward the bed, moving slowly, letting the cold air guide your steps. When you sit down, the quilts bunch around your hips, offering what warmth they can. You pull one across your lap and feel the weight of it settle into your bones. The straw mattress crackles faintly beneath you. You shift your feet under the quilt and tuck the edges around them. Your toes warm slightly, though not enough to make you forget the storm's presence. You take a long breath. The air feels thicker than before, as if the snow outside is pushing inward, compressing the cabin's atmosphere. You listen again. The storm has entered its steady phase, the relentless middle portion, when the intensity is less dramatic, but far more lasting. That is the dangerous part, the prolonged pressure that tests a cabin's patience. You adjust the quilt over your knees and let your gaze drift around the room. The fire still glows, the walls still stand, the roof still holds. Everything is steeped in a quiet that feels almost sacred. You think of the families in the 1800s who once huddled in similar cabins, hearing storms just like this one pressing against their walls. Some accounts mention how snowdrifts would bury windows, completely turning the interior into a dim cocoon of firelight and breath. You feel yourself living that reality, now tucked inside a chamber of muted sound and thick cold. You shift again, pulling the quilt higher. The storm presses harder for a moment before settling back into its slow rhythmic pattern. The cabin absorbs the force, groaning softly. You feel it in the bed frame, in the straw beneath you, in the wood touching your back. The world outside may be swallowing the cabin inch by inch, but inside you're still here, still breathing, still listening to the storm shape the night into something fierce and strangely beautiful. The snow keeps rising, the wind keeps pushing, and you remain wrapped in quilts and firelight, a small ember of warmth buried in a deepening winter storm. You sit for a little while longer beneath the quilt, feeling the weight of the storm settle around the cabin like a thick blanket. The fire crackles behind you, giving off just enough glow to sketch faint warm colours across the quilts. Eventually you push yourself up and walk toward the small wooden chest near the far wall. That is where the extra clothing stays folded or rolled in uneven stacks. You kneel beside it, lift the lid, and a soft, cool draft breathes out, as if the chest itself has been saving the cold for you. Inside, the garments are layered in rough piles. Wool shirts, knitted socks, worn petticoats, long johns and scarves that have seen far too many winters. You sort through them slowly, brushing away stray bits of straw and lint. As you lift a thick linen shirt, the fabric feels coarse and slightly stiff in your hands. You know exactly why. Washing clothes in winter required snowmelt or pond ice chipped into buckets, so people often avoided washing thicker garments for as long as possible. The fabric absorbs smoke, sweat, and cabin scent, until the fibres feel heavier than they should. You choose a long wool undershirt and shake it lightly. Dust floats upwards, swirling in the firelight before settling to the floor. The shirt smells faintly of sheep wood smoke and faint herbal traces. Many households in the early 19th century kept sachets of dried thyme or rosemary in storage chests, partly to discourage insects and partly to keep the garment smelling somewhat pleasant. The faint herbal note clings to this shirt even after many nights of cabin life. You pull the shirt over your head and feel the scratch of wool along your shoulders. The fibres pull at your skin slightly, but the warmth they offer is worth the discomfort. You tug the sleeves down to your wrists and flex your fingers. The knit fabric traps heat quickly, forming a barrier against the cold, settling deeper into the cabin. You wrap a scarf around your neck, pulling the ends down beneath the layers. The scarf smells like smoke from nights when it hung too close to the hearth. You open the chest again and pick up a pair of heavy socks. They are thick, knotted and uneven in texture. You slide them onto your feet, feeling the gentle prickle of the wool against your ankles. Your toes sigh with relief. This small act of layering makes the cabin feel a little more manageable. You know that sleeping fully clothed was common not just in frontier cabins, but across colder climates in general, and layering helped guard against the sharp temperatures that settled in once fires burned low. For a moment you hold a pair of leather mittens in your hands. They are stiff from last winter and smell faintly of tallow. You turn them over and trace the seams with your thumb. While not always used for sleeping, mittens were sometimes tucked under quilts to keep them warm for morning chores. You smile slightly and set them aside, knowing the night is long and your hands may need them later. You pull a thick-skirted garment from the bottom of the chest and unfold it. The cloth billows slowly, catching the firelight in ripples. You run your hand along the hem. It is cool and slightly damp from the humidity the storm has pulled into the cabin. Dampness like this is common in winter storms, creeping into fabric fibres and lingering around the walls. People in the 1800s often warmed their garments by the fire before dressing, a method that sometimes left singe marks on clothing, but made mornings bearable. You consider doing the same, but decide against it for now, knowing the fire is working hard enough, just keeping the room warm. You place the garment back into the chest and close the lid, letting the small latch click softly. The sound echoes faintly, blending with the storm outside. A sudden gust pushes a flurry of snow against the wall, sending a vibration through the floorboards. You feel the draft coil around your ankles again. You wrap your arms across your chest, breathing into the scarf for warmth. You walk toward the hearth with slow, careful steps. The fire glows deep orange now, not as tall as before, but steady. You kneel beside it and stretch out your hands, letting the warmth sink into your palms and travel up your arms. The glow reflects on the clothing you are wearing, casting shifting patterns across the wool. You feel warmer, but only just. You know that once you lie under the quilts, the warmth these layers trap will matter more than anything. The kettle hanging above the flames rattles faintly as it warms. You tilt your head toward it, listening. Hot water was a luxury in nights like these. Boiled water could be poured into small jugs or wrapped stones and placed at the foot of the bed to offer brief but precious warmth. Letters from the period mention families heating whatever objects they had just to avoid waking with numb feet. You consider heating a small jug now, but the storm has drained your energy, and the fire will need tending soon enough. You stand and adjust the scarf around your shoulders. Another pulse of wind shakes the cabin. Snow slides from the roof, landing in a muffled thump outside. The storm has settled into its deep phase, the heavy, ceaseless fall that can last through the entire night. You know the weight of the snow outside will press against the walls, quieting the world into a kind of cold hush. You walk to the bed and sit again, feeling the layers of clothing cushion your body in a way the straw mattress never could. The quilts brush your legs, their warmth faint but comforting. You pull them closer as you test how the wool undershirt and thick socks trap heat. You stretch your legs, toes flexing happily inside the wool. You lift the top quilt briefly and let it settle across your lap. The familiar weight rests there like a protective arm. Outside, another gust swirls against the cabin with a hollow rising sound. The logs respond with a soft groan. You sit straighter, eyes lifting toward the noise. The weight of the snow, the push of the wind, the trembling of the cabin, all blend into a reminder that winter storms were never meant to be taken lightly. You adjust the scarf again, feeling the warmth gather around your neck. The layers you now wear soften the cold that keeps pressing into the cabin. It will not disappear, but it has lost some of its bite. You wrap the quilt snugly around your waist and lean forward at elbows on your knees, breathing in the smell of wool smoke and faint herbs. The storm may keep building outside, piling snow higher, testing the walls harder, but inside you now sit wrapped in layers that frontier families trusted for generations. Clothing becomes armor, warmth becomes strategy, and every piece you put on turns the night into something you can endure. You stay seated on the bed for a few breaths, listening to the scarf rustle lightly against your collar as you move. The storm outside shifts in tone again, dropping into a deeper rolling voice that presses heavily at the walls. You rise quilt, still clutched in your hands, and begin walking slowly toward the center of the cabin. A soft vibration hums under your feet. It comes from overhead, where the rafters groan beneath the weight of snow and the restless push of the wind. You tilt your head upward, pausing, waiting for the house to reveal what it is feeling. The sound above you changes again. A long creak stretches across the length of a beam, followed by a small pop near the corner where the roof joins the wall. You know the noise is not a sign of failing structure. It is simply the timber reacting to cold swelling in some places and tightening in others. Many old accounts describe rafters that made as much noise as the storms themselves, a kind of constant conversation between wood and winter. You feel that truth now in the way the ceiling seems to sigh with every gust. You take a step closer to the hearth, tilting your head toward the rafters. A faint dusting of powder drops from a seam between two boards and drifts downward like tiny stars catching the glow of the fire before disappearing onto the floor. You brush your fingers along the surface of a stool and feel a barely there sprinkle of cold grains. That tells you snow is working its way under the shingles. Not a full leak, just a whisper of what lies above. You walk to the wall where the rafters are most visible and stand beneath them, letting the draft from the roof slip across your cheek. The wood overhead looks dark and uneven, each beam shaped by hand rather than machine. You can see the marks of old tools, the uneven notches, the spots where bark once clung stubbornly. Carpenters of the era relied on axes and draw knives, meaning no two rafters were ever perfectly alike. You feel the individuality of each one as your eyes follow the slanted angles toward the chimney. A soft clatter sounds near the roofline. Not loud, just a tiny sudden shift like a handful of small stones sliding down a wooden slope. You pause and listen carefully. It is probably packed snow shifting under its own weight. Deep storms often force snow to slide and settle, repeatedly making a pattern of soft slides across rooftops that could last all night. The subtle motion comforts you in a strange way. It means the structure is holding standing firm as the snow tries to reshape the world around it. You lean your hand against the wall, keeping your eyes trained on the rafters. The firelight wavers, throwing amber arcs across the wood. For a moment the shadows make the ceiling look alive, turning the beams into ribs of some great slumbering beast that exhales with each gust. You let the thought linger. It makes the cabin feel companionable rather than lonely. A memory nudges its way forward, something you once read about families who carved little protective symbols into rafters to guard against storms and misfortune. Not official religious icons, just simple marks or patterns born from old superstitions. You wonder whether anyone carved such things here. You step closer to a beam and trace the surface with your fingertips searching for a shape. You find only rough wood and the grooves left by tools. If any small charm once lived here, it has long since faded into the grain. Another crack travels across the rafters, sharper this time, snatching your attention. You hold perfectly still, listening. The beam settles again, quieter now. The sound reminds you how much moisture and temperature can change wood. In fact, diaries from the period mention that rafters sometimes swelled enough during storms to press against roof boards so tightly that builders could hear faint tapping from above. You feel a similar sensation now, a tiny tremor overhead as the cabin adjusts itself. You step back from the wall and rub your arms against the cold creeping deeper into the room. Your layers help, but winter has a talent for finding every weakness. You walk slowly toward the fire, letting its heat soak into you as you stand close. The flames flicker upward, sending warm currents along your sleeves. You close your eyes, briefly appreciating the quiet hum. When you open them again, something shifts overhead. A sudden, sharper groan echoes across the rafters, long and brittle like an old tree, bending under its own weight. The sound makes your stomach tighten for a moment. You step away from the hearth, tilt your head up again and study the ceiling. The beam is holding, the entire roof is holding. It's just speaking in the only voice it knows. You walk toward the cabin's far wall, standing directly beneath the triangular junction where the roof meets the logs. The cold is sharper here, drifting down from the edges where the insulation is weakest. You let your fingers skim the wall, feeling the faint temperature drop as you approach the ceiling. Even with the fire burning, this spot will remain cold all night. People of the time often warned against sleeping too close to the eaves, believing drafts could bring illness. Whether it was the cold itself or simply discomfort, the advice survives in old writings that still leave scholars unsure how much of it was practical knowledge or just folklore passed down. A small rustling sound from above makes you pause. Not wind this time. More like the soft scuttle of something small finding its own shelter in the roof. You exhale slowly. In winter, mice and other tiny creatures often live just beneath the shingles, curled into nests made of grass and stolen bits of cloth. You're not surprised to hear movement. You simply hope it stays above the rafters rather than deciding to visit the cabin interior. The fire pops again, reminding you that warmth is never far away. You walk back to the hearth and feel the heat brush your face like a gentle hand. You stretch your fingers toward the flames, welcoming the rush of warmth that sinks into your palms. The rafters creak once more, softer now, settling into the rhythm of the storm. You turn and glance up at them again. They look ancient tonight, like they have seen more winters than you can possibly imagine. Snow thumps softly from above. The wood groans in quiet complaint. The cabin shifts under the storm's weight, not failing, not struggling, just adjusting in the steady, stubborn way that frontier buildings often did. You wrap your arms around your torso, savouring the warmth that radiates from your clothing. Above you, the rafters continue their quiet chorus of wooden murmurs. Every creak, every pop, every sigh is part of the night's unfolding story, a reminder that the cabin is enduring the storm with you, beam by beam, breath by breath. You stand beneath the rafters for another moment, listening to their quiet muttering before turning toward the little open space in the centre of the cabin. The fire glows behind you, warm but too distant to reach the shadows hiding in the corners. You walk slowly toward the far side of the room where the bedding crates and tools crowd together. The deeper you go, the colder the air grows. The chill creeps along your sleeves and curls around your wrists, making you shiver despite the layers you carefully put on earlier. There is a heaviness to this part of the cabin, not physical, but the kind that settles when too many people have lived close for too long inside cramped wooden walls. You run your fingers along the wooden lid of a small storage box and think about what life would be like here if you were not alone. Families in the early 19th century often packed themselves together in single-room log cabins, with as many as 8 or 10 people sharing the same tight space. Privacy did not exist. Personal boundaries blurred with every winter night as the cold forced everyone closer. You step toward the bed again, but instead of sitting, you pause and look at the empty places beside it. You imagine 2 or 3 more straw mattresses pushed together, each occupied by someone who spoke softly, or breathed loudly, or tucked their cold feet under someone else's blanket. You picture children whispering under quilts, cheeks flushed from the fire's heat, and parents trying to keep them quiet while the storm growled outside. A familiar detail from frontier writings describes families sleeping in a row, arranged like stacked spoons, conserving warmth the same way animals huddle in barns. You draw the quilt around your shoulders and exhale slowly, letting the idea settle. If there were others here tonight, you would feel their weight on the bedstead, hear their shifting breaths, sense their movements just inches away. A small cabin turns every sound into a shared experience. Even the softest sigh becomes a presence. Your imagination lingers on the thought. You picture a mother sitting near the fire, sewing by its weak glow, while children drift in and out of dreams. You picture someone turning over in their straw bed, rustling and making the rafters echo faintly. You picture someone rising to tend the fire in the middle of the night, stepping carefully to avoid waking the person beside them. That tiny domestic choreography was a constant reality in these spaces. You walk to the wall where several hooks hold clothing and tools. You run your fingers across the garments, they are cold rigid with frost clinging along their seams. If people were actually crowded into this cabin, these hooks would be packed with coats and hats, dripping melted snow onto the floor. The smell of damp wool and wet leather would fill the entire room. Letters from the era often mention how winter storms made indoor air dense with steam from drying clothes, mixing with smoke from the fireplace. You can almost feel that heaviness now as you draw a breath. Near the hook sits a long bench that doubles as storage. You lift its lid and glance inside. Extra blankets, a tin cup, a few pieces of folded fabric, and a narrow bundle of cloth fill the compartment. The bundle is interesting. When you untie it, you find a small number of personal items tucked within a comb, a scrap of ribbon, a small wooden toy someone carved long ago. The toy surprises you. A carved sheep, smoothed with use, its edges softened by many small hands. You turn it gently in your fingers, imagining a child holding it close on nights exactly like this. Some stories hint at families keeping cherished objects beneath or beside their shared beds, little tokens to comfort restless minds. You return the toy to its cloth and tie it again, placing it softly back inside the bench. The sense of many lives passing through these walls deepens, filling the room with a warmth that has nothing to do with fire. You close the bench and sit on it, facing the centre of the cabin. The storm pushes against the walls again, making the air tremble. You picture the floor lined with bodies under quilts, all curled close to each other, not just for warmth, but for the reassurance of shared presence. During bitter winter nights, many families believed that closeness itself helped ward off sickness. Whether that belief came from observation or hope is something historians still discuss, but you understand the comfort it once offered. You lift your legs and pull them close, letting the quilt wrap around you fully. The cabin feels so much larger when you imagine it filled with the quiet sounds of sleeping people. The familiar scratch of wool shirts, the soft murmurs of someone dreaming, the shift of straw beds as a child wiggles closer to a parent. These tiny noises would fill the dark. In a place where the storm tried to swallow the world outside, those sounds would anchor everyone to each other. The fire pops again, echoing against the logs. You glance toward it, imagining someone else rising to tend it while the rest stay curled in blankets. Sleep shared becomes lighter. Every person senses every move. To live in such proximity shapes not only warmth, but also the relationships between family members. Some found it comforting, others found it exhausting. Most felt both. A faint sound from the corner pulls your attention. Just a soft thump, maybe a piece of stored wood settling. But for a second you imagine it as the quiet shift of someone trying to find a better spot on a crowded bed. The thought lingers, gently tugging at your imagination. You realise how comforting it could be to have other bodies sharing the burden of the cold. Yet you also sense how difficult it must have been with hardly any space to stretch, move, or breathe privately. You rise from the bench and walk back toward the bedstead. You rest your hand on it and imagine how many times families pressed close together under these quilts, trying to stay warm enough to pass the night. You picture the weight of shared blankets, and the warmth that came from gathering everyone in one place close enough to hear each heartbeat. The cabin creaks again, the storm pushing harder. You pull the quilt tighter around your shoulders and lie down slowly on the straw mattress. The space beside you is empty now, but it is easy to imagine it filled with the comforting presence of others seeking warmth in the same fragile shelter. Here in the dim firelight, surrounded by the memory of shared nights from long ago, you breathe slowly and let the imagined warmth of many bodies settle around you, turning the cold storm outside into something slightly less immense. You lie still for a moment, letting the imagined warmth of a crowded bed fade gently from your mind. The straw rustles as you shift onto your side, pulling the quilts tighter around your shoulders. The fire glows softly across the room, its orange light breathing against the walls like a tired lantern. You sit up slowly because something has changed in the air. The cold feels sharper near your face, the kind that touches your skin with quick, needling fingers. You exhale and watch your breath drift upward in a faint pale cloud. That small sign tells you what is happening. Somewhere in the cabin, the water stored for everyday use has begun to freeze. You move toward the far corner where the wooden barrel stands. It is a thick, round container bound with iron hoops, and the top is covered with a wooden lid that always seems slightly crooked. You lift the lid and immediately feel the cold roll out like fog escaping a cave. You lean closer. The surface of the water has a thin, cloudy sheet hardening across it, so delicate that your fingertip could probably break it with the slightest touch. You tap the surface gently. The ice cracks in a tiny ring that spreads outward like a spiderweb. You let the lid rest beside the barrel for a moment and crouch down. The cold inside the wood stings your cheeks. In houses like this, it was completely normal for water to freeze overnight. Even kitchens in larger homes recorded the same struggle. The fire cannot reach every corner, and the storm outside certainly does not help. You tilt your head slightly, noticing how the ice forms more thickly near the edges, where the barrel meets the wall. That corner collects cold like a bowl collects rain. A faint creaking noise draws your attention. Not from the rafters this time, but from the barrel itself, the ice slowly tightening, pushing against the wood. You run a hand along the barrel's side, feeling how chill the planks have become. You remember reading once that some families tried keeping their water indoors in smaller jugs near the fire to prevent freezing, but large barrels like this simply could not be moved around so easily. You imagine someone arguing earlier in the winter about whether the barrel should be moved closer to the door or closer to the hearth, never finding a solution that satisfied everyone. You stand again and rub your hands together to bring life back into them. Your fingers protest stiff from the cold. As you breathe over your knuckles, the storm outside shifts. A low, steady rumble rolls along the cabin walls. The snow piling there must be enormous by now, pressing in so deeply that the world beyond this cabin barely exists. You feel the vibration at your feet, almost like footsteps in slow motion travelling through the ground. You place the barrel lid back in place and stand close to the wall. The wind whistles in a thin high note before dropping suddenly into silence. That silence is almost more unsettling than the noise. You lean forward slightly. The cold seeping through the logs chills your forehead, making your breath catch for a moment. The wall feels as if it has swallowed winter into its bones. You turn and walk toward the small table near the hearth. A tin cup sits there untouched. When you lift it, its bottom is frosted with a delicate white glaze. You blow across the metal, watching the frost bloom outward, before melting slightly. Your fingertips tingle from the icy touch, and you rub them firmly against your coat. The fire cracks behind you. A spark jumps upward, swirling once before fading. You kneel beside the hearth, placing the cup near the edge of the stones so the heat can ease the frost. The warmth feels like relief spreading across your skin. You close your eyes, enjoying the small victory of thawing fingertips and easing breath. You open your eyes again, noticing how the air above the fire gently wavers. The flames dance with slow, deliberate motions, pushing back the cold only in small circles. In places like this, people sometimes kept a kettle, simmering through the night just to moisten the air, believing dry winter air worsened coughs and made sleep harder. Whether the idea was entirely accurate remains uncertain, as writings from the era describe families arguing for and against the practice, especially when firewood was limited. You shift your weight and look around the cabin. The walls have darkened with moisture. Your breath still hangs faintly. The cold deepens under the bed, slithers around the corners and collects in unseen pockets. You rise from the hearth and walk toward the door, pressing your fingers against the wood. It is colder than the barrel. You imagine the snow pressed up against the outside like a heavy blanket, forcing its will on the cabin. You step back and glance toward the barrel again, its lid now resting slightly askew. You walk over and lift it once more. The ice has thickened in just a few minutes, spreading across the surface like a thin white skin. You push a fingertip through it again, and this time it resists for half a second before giving way. The cold shoots through your finger, sharp and startling. You snatch your hand back and cradle it in your other palm. You exhale and let the lid fall back into place gently. You shake out your shoulders and straighten up, listening to the storm roar once again. The sound shifts with the wind, sometimes deep and distant, sometimes sharp and immediate. The cabin reacts to each wave with a groan or a shiver. You walk slowly to the bed, lowering yourself onto the straw once more. You pull the quilt around your legs and rub your hands together until your fingers warm. The fire glows softly through the dimness, steady but not strong. The frozen barrel sits quietly in the corner, a reminder that the cold has begun winning small battles within the cabin. The storm presses on, reshaping the night with each breath of wind. You tuck your feet under the quilts and breathe deeply, letting warmth gather around your chest. The ice will keep forming, the storm will keep rising, and you, wrapped in layers and quilts, will keep tending the fire, breathing through the cold, and listening to the winter press its weight against the world outside. You stay bundled under the quilts for a while, letting the fire's gentle glow soothe the sting in your fingers. The storm outside has settled into its relentless rhythm, pressing snow against the cabin in thick waves. But after a few slow breaths, you notice something else in the room. A faint shuffling, a soft snort, a tiny shift of weight on the floorboards. You turn your head toward the sound, already knowing what you will see. You rise from the bed with a sigh, gathering the quilts around your shoulders like a cloak, and step toward the dim corner closest to the door. There in the half-shadow stands a small cluster of animals huddled together in a patch of hay you spread earlier. The closest one, a young goat with a mottled winter coat, lifts its head sleepily and blinks at you. Behind it, 2 chickens settle, with their feathers puffed so large they look twice their usual size. The chickens shift their feet and tuck their heads into their wings. Their soft clucking is barely audible over the wind's steady push. You kneel beside them and run your hand along the goat's back. The animal is warm. Warmer than the floorboards, warmer than the air in the corner, warmer even than your own hands. You rest your palm, letting the animal's heat settle into your fingers. In small rural homes, bringing livestock indoors during severe storms was a common part of survival. Animals provided warmth, security, and a chance at saving resources that would otherwise be lost to the cold. You feel the truth of that now as the goat nuzzles against your sleeve. A chicken shifts and stares at you with one bead-like eye. It blinks slowly, unimpressed by your presence. You smile softly. The birds smell of straw and dust, and their warmth radiates in a small circle around them. Some households kept chickens in simple cages during winter nights, but many simply let them wander near the hearth, or settle beside goats and calves. The shared warmth mattered more than strict order. You lean closer to the goat as it lets out a soft huff. Your hand travels down to its flank where the fur grows coarser. The scent of animal musk mixes faintly with the smell of smoke drifting from the hearth. You breathe it in slowly, realizing that the combination, odd as it is, feels strangely calming. You look toward the door, noticing the faint flicker of cold light beneath its frame. The snow must be high outside, and with animals inside, the air already feels tighter. You rise carefully, stepping around the sleeping chickens. The hay crackles beneath your feet. You watch the animals for a moment, noting how they position themselves instinctively. The chickens, tucked near the warmer centre of the hay, the goat positioned as if shielding them from drafts. It makes sense. Animals understand storms in ways humans sometimes forget. You walk slowly toward the table near the fire. There's a small wooden bowl resting on it, and inside are a few kitchen scraps from earlier. You pick up a piece of dried carrot and break it in half. The crack is loud in the quiet room. You carry it back to the goat, holding it out carefully. The goat sniffs your hand, then nibbles the carrot in a slow, methodical way that makes you smile. Feeding animals inside the cabin was something families occasionally debated. Some thought it invited pests or disease. Others believed it was simply part of living close to nature during hard winters. Letters from that period mention disagreements about it, though they never reveal a truly definitive answer. You step back and sit on a low stool in the same corner. The goats chew. The chickens rustle. The warmth in the room grows thicker where the cluster of bodies gathers. You tuck your hands into your sleeves, absorbing the small pocket of heat the animals provide. You do not mind their presence. They feel like companions rather than intruders, especially in a night like this. A faint tap sounds near the window. Not the storm this time. More like the hesitant peck of a beak on wood. You turn your head. Another chicken, perhaps the boldest of the group, has begun investigating the lower windowsill, tapping it softly, as if checking whether it might still hold a trace of grain. You chuckle under your breath. The bird hops in a small circle, feathers puffed in exaggerated self-importance, before returning to the hay. You admire its determination. Even in the coldest times, creatures find ways to occupy themselves. You sit there longer than you expect, watching the animals shift, breathe, and settle. Their calm movements draw your attention away from the storm's noise. You find yourself breathing more slowly, matching their rhythm. The goat's steady presence has a tempering effect on your nerves, smoothing out the tension that winter storms always seem to bring. A sudden gust hits the cabin wall. Snow slides heavily down the outside. The goat flinches but does not bolt. It only lifts its head and listens. Animals often pick up subtle cues from storms, sensing changes in pressure before humans notice them. You watch the goat's ears tilt one direction then another, as if deciphering messages hidden in the wind's voice. You lean forward and rest your elbows on your knees, letting your hands dangle loosely near the hay. The chickens coo softly. Their little sounds melt into the fire's hum, filling the cabin with a kind of domestic harmony you would not have expected just an hour ago. You imagine families in the 1800s feeling something similar, drawing comfort from the living warmth around them, even when resources were scarce and danger hovered outside. You straighten slowly, letting the quilt slip down your arms. You stand, giving the goat one last gentle stroke. Its warm breath puffs against your wrist. You step back toward the hearth, leaving the animals in their corner. Their quiet presence softens the space, making the storm feel less enormous and the night a little more forgiving. The fire glows steadily. The animals settle deeper into the hay, and you, wrapped once again in quilts and warm layers, return to your place near the bed, carrying their warmth with you as the storm continues its long, patient siege on the world outside. You return to your bed and lower yourself onto the straw, letting the quilts drape across your legs. The animals shift quietly in their hay nest, their warmth settling into the cabin like a small, steady heartbeat. For a moment the fire's glow seems stronger, but then the wind outside gathers itself in a deep inhalation, and the storm changes character. It no longer brushes the cabin. It attacks. The next gust slams against the wall with a thudding sound that makes the rafters tremble. Snow lashes the logs so hard that the noise sharpens into a gritty scrape, as if the entire storm has decided to grind itself against your home. You sit up straighter. The air inside tightens around your chest. You feel the cold push through the smallest fractures in the chinking, slipping in with determined fingers. You rise from the bed again and move toward the door, drawn by the new tone in the wind. You press your palm against the wooden surface. It vibrates under your hand, quivering in response to the storm's strength. You imagine the entire structure groaning under the strain, the logs pressing back against a force far larger than anything human. The door itself feels colder now, so cold that your fingertips burn slightly. You lean closer and listen. The sound outside is no longer a simple howl. It is layered. Heavy gusts collide with sharp whirls, and underneath it a low rumble pulses like distant thunder. You place your ear against the door and hear snow sliding in thick waves across the ground. If the drifts keep building like this, the entire lower half of the cabin will disappear beneath them before dawn. Some frontier journals mention storms so intense that cabins became half buried, forcing families to dig their way out the next morning. You feel the truth of that possibility as the wood under your palm shakes. You step back and let out a slow, steady breath that fogs in front of you. The firelight flickers more erratically now, swaying in response to small drafts you had not felt earlier. You kneel beside the hearth and feed another log to the flames. The fire responds eagerly, rising with a shower of sparks before settling again into a low, determined burn. You brush ash off your sleeve and lean close, absorbing the heat, while the fury outside continues unchecked. A sudden rattle from the roof jolts you. Something heavy slides across the shingles, skidding downward, before stopping abruptly with a muffled thud. You glance upward. Snow must be breaking apart from the higher drifts collapsing under its own weight. The sound repeats in different places, creating a strange rhythm above your head. Slide, thump, slide, thump. You stand slowly and move toward the center of the cabin where the ceiling beams form intersecting lines above you. The rafters groan again louder this time, bending under the added burden. You study them for a long moment, noticing how the firelight pools along their edges. The wood looks tense, almost strained. Yet cabins were built to flex under stress, to shift and sway, just enough to endure what nature hurled at them. Old accounts describe cabins surviving storms that toppled nearby barns simply because logs, when notched properly, allowed movement rather than breaking. You take small comfort in that as another long creak shivers through the beams. You walk toward the window. The oiled paper covering it glows faintly, but the light is distorted and murky, like the sky has turned into a swirling grey curtain. When you place your fingertips against the frame, the paper bulges inward with each gust, then snaps back into place as the wind retreats for a moment. The pressure changes so quickly that you pull your hand away. You imagine the world outside becoming unrecognizable, shapeless, under piles of snow shifting like dunes in a desert of ice. The storm gives no sign of tiring. You move toward the animals again, checking their corner. The goat lifts its head briefly, ears turning toward the sound of the roof above. The chickens shuffle their wings and settle deeper into the hay. You kneel beside them and press your hand against the goat's side. Its warmth reassures you in a way you did not expect. You whisper a quiet reassurance without thinking, knowing the animal cannot understand, but somehow hoping it hears your calm. A loud shudder from the north wall tugs your attention. You stand quickly and stride across the cabin. That part of the wall seems to take the brunt of the wind. You touch the logs, feeling a thin pulse of cold that has grown sharper since earlier. The chinking between two of the logs appears to have shifted. A small draught leaks through, brushing your fingertips with icy breath. You step back to grab an old cloth from a nearby shelf and press it into the gap. It dulls the draught immediately, though you can still feel faint threads of cold creeping around the edges. You remain by the wall for a moment, watching the cloth ripple softly with the air pushing against it. The storm has become a siege, now relentless in its pressure. Some weather records from the era note that certain regions saw storms lasting 3 days without pause, piling snow so high that even smoke from chimneys disappeared beneath the drifts. The uncertainty of those accounts lingers in the back of your mind. You cannot know if this storm will relent by morning or continue reshaping the land outside until the cabin looks like a buried ember of firelight in a sea of white. You walk back to the hearth once more, dragging the quilt with you. The warmth pulls at your chilled skin. You crouch and rest your hands on your knees, letting the fire kiss your knuckles. The flames feel fiercer now, or perhaps you have simply grown colder. You add another small branch, watching it curl and blacken before catching flame. Behind you, the wind slams into the walls again with a sound that makes your pulse skip. The cabin shudders, wood creaking roof, groaning snow sliding in heavy slabs. You close your eyes and breathe deeply. The animals shuffle softly, the fire crackles, the storm snarls. You gather your quilts, close retreat to the bed, and lower yourself onto the straw as the cabin continues to hold its ground against the night. The storm may circle you like a roaring creature, but inside the fire still glows, the animals still breathe, and you still endure wrapped in layers and stubborn warmth. You sit on the edge of the bed again, quilts wrapped tight around your shoulders, listening to the storm grind against the cabin in slow, punishing waves. The fire has softened into a reddish cradle of embers, glowing with the quiet determination of something that refuses to vanish. You know you cannot let it sink much further. Night in a frontier cabin has a way of stretching endlessly, and anyone who sleeps too deeply risks waking to a cold so heavy it feels carved into the air. With a weary sigh, you rise and walk toward the hearth. Your footsteps sound dull on the floorboards, muffled by the cold that clings to everything. When you kneel beside the fire, the warmth touches your skin like a hesitant greeting. You lift a charred stick and nudge the embers apart, revealing faint trails of orange beneath the ash. The glow brightens slightly, but not enough. You reach for another piece of wood and place it carefully on top. It crackles at the edges, a soft whisper revealing it is still damp from snowmelt. You blow gently across the embers. Your breath makes the ashes swirl upward in little flurries. For a moment, the underside of the new log glimmers brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat. You lean closer, coaxing the fire with patient breaths. Night tending was a responsibility often shared among family members during harsh winters, a small but essential act that kept everyone alive. You feel the weight of that duty now as you push another glowing coal toward the center. The fire responds at last. A thin tongue of flame reaches up, tasting the wood. You sit back on your heels, relieved. You stretch your fingers toward the warmth, letting it soak into your knuckles. The flames are fragile, still wavering as the cabin shivers under the storm's pressure. But progress is progress, and fire teaches patience more thoroughly than almost anything else. As you tend the flame, you feel something faint in the air, a scent you did not notice earlier. The fire is burning through a knot in the wood, releasing a sharp resin smell that cuts through the smoky atmosphere. It curls into your nose, surprising and oddly pleasant. Frontier children sometimes claim that knots in firewood made tiny bursts of light or strange colours when they burned. Whether that was superstition or simply a trick of excited eyes is uncertain, but you can understand why the idea stuck. The resin-rich flame in front of you pulses with a liveliness the others lack. Another gust rattles the cabin. Snow spills across the roof in scraping sheets. You worry for a moment that the chimney draft might be disrupted. You glance upward, watching how the smoke ribbons toward the flue. It leans slightly, bending left, then straightens again. The balance is delicate. If the wind shifted harder, the smoke could hesitate or backtrack. Some early writings mention how tricky storm nights could make chimney drafts, yet there is not complete agreement on whether poorly built chimneys caused the issue or whether certain wind patterns simply confused the natural upward pull. You find yourself hoping tonight aligns with the gentler theories. You stand slowly and stretch your back muscles stiff from the cold. The fire feels steadier now, warm enough that you can step away without fear of it fading again too soon. You turn toward the animals in the corner. The goat is asleep, its legs tucked beneath its body, breath rising in soft clouds. The chickens remain huddled, their feathers rustling gently with each tiny shift. The warmth they generate stays contained in their little cluster, but you can feel its influence seeping into the nearby air. You walk toward the rough wooden shelf beside the hearth. A small iron pot rests there, cold and dark. You pick it up and set it on a flat stone near the embers, letting it warm gradually. You know better than to place it directly into the flames. Iron shrieks loudly when heated too quickly, and you do not want to startle the animals or crack the pot. Households often warmed cookware slowly during winter nights so they could melt snow or heat broth if someone needed it before dawn. The memory of that simple wisdom drifts through your thoughts as you watch the pot darken with reflected firelight. Another crack from the fire jolts your attention. A spark leaps upward and lands dangerously close to a woolen cloth on the floor. You act instantly, pinching it between your fingers before it can burn. Your heart jumps in your chest. It is so easy to forget how quickly a cabin can turn from sanctuary to kindling. You shake out the cloth, fold it, and place it safely on a nearby stool. You crouch again by the fire, deciding to build it just a bit stronger before you try to rest again. You add a small piece of split timber and adjust the coals beneath it. The flames brighten into a warm, confident glow. You feel the heat kiss your cheeks and nose, chasing away the worst of the chill that settled into your bones. Outside, the storm growls, but inside the fire answers quietly, a light that refuses to be intimidated. When the flames settle into a steady rise, you sit back, pulling the quilt around your shoulders. The warmth clings to you more firmly now. You hold your hands near the embers one last time before standing satisfied that the fire will survive the next stretch of night. You make your way slowly back to the bed. The straw rustles as you climb beneath the quilts, easing your limbs into the nest of warmth. The bed creaks faintly familiar and reassuring. Over by the wall, the goat lets out a soft snort, adjusting its position. The chickens murmur their half-dreaming noises. The cabin feels alive in its own quiet way, every creature inside doing its part to push back the storm's demands. You nestle deeper under the quilts, watching the fire's reflection flicker on the wall as the storm continues its cold assault outside. The night is long, but you have breathed warmth back into the cabin, one patient ember at a time. You lie beneath the quilts for only a short while before the air begins to sting your nose again. It is the kind of cold that slips in gradually quiet enough that you almost miss its arrival until it wraps itself around your face. You sigh, knowing exactly what that means. The fire, no matter how carefully tended, has not been able to keep the smoke moving upward as smoothly as before. You swing your legs out from under the bedding, your feet sinking into the straw with a faint rustle, and rise slowly. The chill clings to you like thin ice on water. When you take your first step toward the hearth, you notice the haziness in the air. It hangs lower than before, faint but undeniable. A grey film floats between you and the far wall, drifting toward the rafters in slow, lazy shapes. You inhale gently and catch the thin edge of wood smoke in your throat. Not enough to choke you, but enough to make your eyes prickle. You crouch near the fire and tilt your head upward. The chimney draws steadily for a moment, then the plume wavers sideways as if unsure of its path. You purse your lips. Winter storms can change air pressure rapidly, and that shift sometimes pushes the smoke downward or sideways, instead of letting it rise cleanly. Many old cabin builders wrote about how difficult it was to predict which wind patterns would disrupt the flow, and no one ever seemed to agree on a single explanation. Tonight you feel that same unpredictability in the air around you. You poke the fire, gently lifting the burning log to adjust the airflow beneath it. The embers glow brighter for a moment, then dim, then brighten again. You can tell the wood is burning well enough. The trouble lies not with the fire, but with the storm twisting the air above the cabin. You blow softly on the coal bed, just enough to strengthen the flame without sending sparks flying. The fire responds with a soft flare and a gentle crackle, but even with the flame growing steadier, the air around you remains faintly smoky. You lift your hand into the air and watch the haze drift past your fingers in slow ribbons. The cabin has become a mixing bowl for warm breath, cold drafts, and smoke that refuses to travel upward as smoothly as it should. You blink, rubbing your eyes. The sting eases only slightly. You rise and walk toward the window, partly to check the storm, partly to let your lungs breathe colder air for a moment. The oiled paper looks darker now, almost opaque. Snow must be pressed thickly against it, dulling the outside light even more. You place your fingers on the frame and feel the cold pulsing inward with firmer force. A tiny draft snakes across the back of your hand and curls upward toward your wrist. You pull your sleeve down and turn toward the animals. The goat lifts its head, blinking slowly. Its nostrils flare once as if sensing the smoke before you do. The chickens shift and fluff their feathers, uncomfortable but not panicked. Animals often reacted sharply to thick smoke, yet tonight they remain calm. That gives you reassurance that the cabin's air, though imperfect, is still safe. You return to the hearth and sit beside it, wrapping a quilt around your shoulders again. The fire's warmth touches your face but cannot erase the smoky sting in your eyes. You breathe slowly, counting each inhale and exhale as the haze settles a little closer to the ceiling. You recall reading once about a family who tied wet strips of cloth near their windows to help clear smoky air on storm nights. Whether that worked well or simply made them feel better is uncertain, but the memory nudges you toward your own small experiment. You take a corner of your quilt and dab it lightly with melted snow from your boot tray. Then you hang the damp fabric on a peg near the hearth, letting the warmth pull moisture into the air. Almost immediately the smoke patterns shift, rising ever so slightly higher. You smile faintly. Maybe the trick has some value after all. You turn back to the fire and add a small piece of very dry wood, just enough to strengthen the flame, without filling the cabin with more smoke. It catches quickly, licking upward in long yellow strokes. The chimney draft steadies a little, the smoke pulling upward in a smoother line. You let your shoulders drop in relief. Still the haze lingers, faint as a ghost drifting between the rafters. You walk beneath it, watching how it curls round the beams. The lines swirl and separate, forming patterns that look like pale brush strokes painted across the dark ceiling. You can imagine many people staring at similar shapes on long winter nights, finding stories or warnings hidden in the movements of smoke. Little bits of folklore from the period mention that drifting smoke could signal changes in the weather, though descriptions vary so wildly that no one can be entirely sure how much of it was observation and how much was imagination growing bold in the dark. You reach up and wave your hand gently through the haze. It responds in slow spirals, drifting aside without urgency. The air is still breathable, the smoke only a mild nuisance. You make your way back to the bed and sit again, quilts wrapped tightly around you. The room looks softer now, the haze muting the shadows. The fire glimmers through the faint veil of smoke, creating shifting halos of amber around the furniture. Even the goat's silhouette seems dreamlike through the drifting tendrils. The chickens murmur quietly, their feathers barely visible through the dim glow. You lie back on the straw mattress, watching the ceiling blur slightly. The smoke, though thinning, still hangs in gentle wisps. It is not ideal, but it is part of the reality of a winter storm night in a log cabin. You breathe evenly, letting your lungs adjust to the mix of warm and cold air. The fire crackles softly, a reminder that even imperfect warmth is a gift. As the haze begins to lift little by little, you sink deeper under the quilts and listen to the storm press onward, reshaping the world outside while you rest in the hazy cradle of firelight inside. You linger beneath the quilts, blinking slowly as the faint smoke thins into gentle wisps that drift toward the rafters. The air has grown quieter, though the storm outside has not. You can tell by the low vibration seeping through the floorboards that the wind is still sweeping across the land in long, merciless sweeps. You take another breath and listen closely, feeling the subtle pulse of the storm under your spine. Something else moves in the cabin too, something softer and closer than the weather. A tiny sound rises from the floor near the wall, a faint scuffle, a scratch so small you almost convince yourself you imagined it. You lift your head slightly, letting your ears sharpen in the dimness. Another noise follows, lighter this time, almost like fabric brushing wood. You tilt your head and listen again. There, a tiny patter beneath the floor, not threatening, just part of the night. You ease yourself out from beneath the quilts and sit up, letting the straw mattress sigh under your weight. Your feet touch the floorboards, and they feel colder than before, as if the cold has seeped deeper into the earth beneath the cabin. You stand, quilts draped around your shoulders like a heavy shawl, and walk slowly toward the far wall, guided only by the orange glow of the fire. The sound comes again. This time you hear it more clearly, the soft scuffle of tiny claws navigating narrow spaces. In cabins like this, the dark corners below the floor were natural shelters for small creatures seeking refuge from storms, and it was nearly impossible to keep them out entirely. Some families tried stuffing rags or straw into every visible gap, but the earth beneath the house offered so many pockets that creatures always found their way back. You crouch near one of the wider gaps between planks and lean closer, careful not to disturb the animals resting behind you. The goat lifts its head but stays put. The chickens settle more deeply into their hay, uninterested in the small intruder below. You press your fingertips to the floor and feel a faint vibration. Something tiny is moving in the crawl space, exploring with caution. Probably a mouse, maybe two. They tend to follow the warmth. You lean back a little, remembering how some early settlers stored small bits of mint or dried pennyroyal beneath the floorboards, hoping those scents would discourage rodents. Whether the trick actually worked varies wildly depending on the accounts, and even now you are unsure if the idea came from genuine results, or simply the need to believe in something that might help. Winter encourages that sort of belief. You smile faintly as you rest your hand against the cold wood. Another soft sound breaks the quiet. A quick light tap, then a little scrabble, as if tiny feet have slipped on loose soil. You straighten slowly and walk toward the hearth, feeling the warmth return to your legs as you approach the fire. The flames seem more vibrant now, casting deeper shadows that sway behind the rafters. You sit on a stool near the hearth and let the heat gather around your ankles. The sound under the floor returns in a brief flurry, like a small creature dashing from one hiding place to another. You tilt your head again, tracking it by ear. It moves swiftly, perhaps gathering seeds or searching for a warmer patch of earth. A journal entry you once read described how families could sometimes predict shifts in weather based on rodent behavior. If mice grew restless, it meant the temperature was about to drop further. Whether the idea is grounded in truth or simply repeated observation is something no one seems to fully agree upon, but the thought lingers in your mind as you listen. The cabin trembles with a sudden gust. Snow thumps heavily against the outer wall. The tiny creature beneath the floor pauses, then scurries again, its movements quicker now. You imagine its tiny body seeking whatever warmth seeps through the floorboards, guided by instinct rather than understanding. You rest your chin in your hand, watching the embers glow a deeper red. The presence beneath you is harmless, almost comforting in a strange way. It reminds you that you are not the only living being trying to endure the long night. You stir the fire gently with the poker, creating a burst of sparks. The smoke curls upward more smoothly now. The heat wraps around your fingers, easing their stiffness. You let your eyes drift toward the floor again, listening. The small creature settles somewhere near the corner, its movements fading into soft, irregular rustles. You wrap the quilt tighter around yourself, lowering the poker and leaning back slightly. The goat snorts quietly, shifting its legs beneath its body. One chicken coos in a sleepy grumble that could be annoyance or comfort. It is always hard to tell. You look at them with a soft smile, reassured by their calm. Animals sense danger far more sharply than humans, and their relaxed breathing tells you the visitor beneath the floor is no threat at all. You sit close to the hearth for several minutes, listening to the interplay of sounds, the storm outside, the rustling beneath you, the crackling of the fire, the slow breaths of the animals. The mixture creates an atmosphere that is strangely grounding. Night in a winter cabin is never silent. It is filled with a little movement, soft noises, small reminders that life continues in places you barely notice. You rise again and return to the bed, your quilt trailing behind you like a tired traveller. The straw greets you with its familiar rustle as you settle into the nest of warmth. The faint movement beneath the floor continues in occasional bursts, but it no longer unsettles you. Instead, it joins the night's tapestry, just one more thread woven into the storm's unfolding rhythm. You pull the quilts around your shoulders and breathe deeply. The fire glows steadily. The animals sleep softly. The storm presses on. And beneath the cabin, unseen but present, something tiny moves through the darkness, surviving the cold in its own quiet way. You lie quietly beneath the quilts, listening to the faint scurrying under the floor, until the sound softens into nothing more than a gentle reminder that the night is shared with creatures you will never see. You blink up at the rafters, watching the dim glow from the embers brush their edges with thin ribbons of amber. For a long moment you let your breath settle slow and steady until the heaviness of the storm beyond the cabin begins to feel distant, like something happening in another world. But sleep does not come easily tonight. The storm presses too insistently against the walls and the cold curls around you with curious persistence. You shift under the quilts and close your eyes, hoping your mind will drift. Instead, it slides into a hazy in-between state. Not quite dreaming, but no longer anchored in waking thought. That twilight of consciousness makes everything feel both near and far simultaneously. You sense the fire's warmth at your feet, yet imagine snow touching your shoulders. You know the straw beneath you is real, but your thoughts turn it into a drifting field where anything might step forward. You exhale long and slow. Nights like this played tricks on people. Many accounts from the early rural frontier describe how exhaustion cold and the flicker of firelight created strange half-dreams, not vivid hallucinations, but blurred impressions that stretched the edges of reality. It was not uncommon for someone to wake convinced they had heard voices or footsteps or distant bells, only to find the cabin unchanged. The mind pushed by wind and darkness often walked its own path. You roll onto your back and let the quilts rise around your chin. A faint shimmer of haze still drifts near the rafters. The smoky air bends the firelight into shifting shapes, softening the ceiling into a dreamlike canvas. Maybe it's that blurred light, or the rhythmic push of wind, or the soft breathing of animals nearby. Whatever the cause, your thoughts begin to dissolve into loose threads that twist and weave without direction. Your eyelids lower. In that barely awake state, you imagine the cabin floating in a sea of white, carried slowly across a frozen landscape. The logs beneath you feel less like walls and more like the hull of a ship rocking gently, while snow acts as its waves. The idea is absurd yet calming. The storm's rumble becomes distant thunder. The roof's creaks become the groaning of ropes pulled taut. Your mind tugs and tugs until the cabin dissolves, entirely replaced by a sense of drifting on cold air. Images rise behind your eyelids, soft and shapeless at first. A lantern swinging, a quilt billowing like sails, branches bending low under soft blankets of white. You are not fully asleep, but your mind is weaving together pieces of memory and sensation into something that feels almost like a story. Your breathing slows as a gentle heaviness settles over you. A little spark of noise interrupts the haze. The goat shifts its weight, letting out a quiet grunt. The chickens rustle their feathers. The thin line between dreaming and waking flickers. You sit somewhere between worlds, aware of the animals, but still drifting in the drifting snow of your imagination. It is a strange sensation, but not unpleasant. Nights in such isolation often carried moments like this where consciousness felt fluid and unfixed. You sink deeper into the dreamlike state, and the fire's glow seems to move of its own accord. It sways with the wind guiding your mind into warmer scenes. You picture a hearth in summer windows, open herbs drying from the ceiling. You imagine laughter spilling across wooden floors. Perhaps someone once sat exactly where you sit now, curled beneath quilts, remembering warmer seasons to lull themselves toward rest. A brief thought flickers stories passed down through generations, often included tales of unusual winter dreams. Some described wandering spirits, others recounted memories that did not belong to the dreamer. Whether these stories grew from cold-starved sleep or from older traditions is unclear, but they lingered in remote communities for a reason. Long nights change how the mind moves through darkness. You shift slightly, adjusting the quilts. The straw mattress rustles, and for a moment you imagine the sound as footsteps in a snowy wood. The image blooms behind your eyes, tall trees coated in ice wind whispering through their branches, your own breath, forming a plume in the night air. You blink once, then twice, but the scene clings to your thoughts like a soft echo. You close your eyes and allow the vision to linger. Your mind drifts again. You imagine your breath forming tiny crystals that float into the air before vanishing. You imagine the snow outside rising in tall shifting dunes, reshaping the world into something unfamiliar and silent. Sleep touches your thoughts, guiding them deeper into a realm where logic loosens its grip. Your body softens against the mattress. The quilts cocoon you fully now, and the warmth you worked so hard to create holds you gently. You hear the slow creak of the rafters in the wind. The sound falls into your drifting mind like a lullaby. It makes you wonder briefly whether the ancestors of those who built this cabin heard stories of winter spirits riding storms, shaping dreams, and nudging sleepers towards strange visions. Some old folk tales hinted at such things, though no one seemed entirely sure whether those tales were warnings or comfort. You breathe out slowly again. The fire pops. A tiny spark leaps upward. You imagine the spark becoming a lantern in your dream world, floating gently toward you in the snowy landscape. You follow it, eyes half closed, letting the vision guide your breathing. A goat snorts quietly. The lantern drifts higher. The wind presses harder. The lantern dims. The cabin shifts beneath you. Your consciousness wobbles once more, neither fully asleep nor fully awake. You sink into that narrow channel of drifting awareness where time has no interest in behaving. A minute can feel like an hour like a moment. You float there waiting for sleep to finally claim you, yet the cold finds its way to your face again. A small draft brushes your cheek and nudges you back toward wakefulness. You open your eyes slowly. The cabin is still here. The animals are asleep. The fire glows with stubborn life. The storm roars outside. Your dreamscape dissolves like frost on warm hands, leaving behind only a faint sense of wandering that clings to your bones. You shift your weight, pulling the quilts tighter. Your mind feels loose and stretched, as if it travelled somewhere without fully leaving your body. You exhale long and low, letting the last of the dream drift away. In this moment, you understand why people in remote cabins spoke about winter nights having their own kind of magic. Not supernatural, not frightening, just a quiet reshaping of thought brought on by cold firelight, and the endless song of wind pressing against wood. You close your eyes again, letting the border between waking and dreaming soften once more. The storm continues, the fire hums, and you drift in the fragile warmth, guided gently by the strange, wandering stories that winter nights whisper into half-sleeping minds. You lie beneath the quilts again, letting the last traces of drifting thoughts dissolve into the dimness, when a sudden noise cuts through the haze inside your mind. It is not loud, not even alarming at first, just a blunt, unexpected thump that jars the quiet of the cabin. Your eyes open instantly. For a moment you stay completely still, your breath caught halfway in your chest. The fire glows low, animals shift faintly in the corner, and the storm outside breathes heavily against the walls. Yet beneath all those familiar sounds, something foreign lingers in the air. You push the quilts aside and sit up slowly, letting your feet touch the cool floorboards. The faint warmth trapped under the covers slips away at once, replaced by a subtle shiver that runs up your spine. You hold your breath and listen. The cabin creaks in the wind, but nothing repeats the blunt sound you heard. You stand careful not to disturb the animals and wrap a quilt around your shoulders as you step toward the center of the room. The storm outside has not weakened. Snow continues its assault, scraping and sliding along the roof with heavy insistence. You tilt your head toward the rafters and wait. Nothing. The silence that follows feels strangely hollow, as if the air itself is deciding whether to speak again. You take a step toward the window, thinking perhaps a weighted drift collapsed or a branch fell under the storm's pressure. You approach the oiled paper. It is nearly opaque now, whitened by snow piled thickly against it. You raise your hand and rest your palm lightly on the frame. The surface is so cold it sends a sharp sting through your fingers. You lean close, listening for shifting branches, falling snow, or even the distant groan of a tree struggling under winter's burden. Instead, you hear only the muted roar of the storm. You exhale softly. Nights like these often brought unexpected sounds. Some diaries from the period described sudden thuds caused by snow sliding off pitched roofs or ice breaking free from upper branches. Even the weight of drifting snow could create strange momentary noises that left families alert and uncertain. You stand beside the window trying to decide whether your thump came from something sensible or something else entirely. A faint movement behind you pulls your attention away. The goat shifts in the corner ears, twitching. It lifts its head and sniffs the air, then settles again unconcerned. Animals have a knack for sensing real danger, and its lack of alarm brings you a measure of calm. You take a slow breath and step back toward the hearth. Then the sound repeats. Not as loud this time, but clear enough to stop you mid-step. A short, heavy drop followed by a dull vibration through the wall. You turn toward the sound, your pulse quickening. It came from outside near the north side of the cabin. You walk slowly along the wall, stopping near the place where the chinking is weakest. You place your palm against the logs. The cold pulses through the wood. Nothing moves. Nothing presses back. You close your eyes and listen more intently. There it is again, a shifting, sliding mass. Whatever hit the cabin must be snow settling from a larger drift. You imagine the storm sculpting enormous piles around the walls, reshaping the landscape inch by inch. In some parts of the frontier, heavy drifts formed slabs that could slide all at once, striking cabins with a surprising amount of force. You picture such a slab collapsing from the roof's edge, dropping against the wall and thudding downward into the darkness below. You pull your quilt tighter, reassured but still uneasy. You walk back toward the hearth, letting the firelight steady your nerves. The embers give off a soft glow. You prod them gently with the poker, coaxing a little more warmth into the air. The flames respond with a flicker that climbs halfway up the blackened log. As you crouch there, feeding heat into your hands, your thoughts drift to old winter tales told around hearths. Some families shared stories of night travellers who roamed storms, brushing against rooftops or tapping at windows. Others spoke of woodland creatures seeking shelter, their movements mistaken for spirits. Whether these tales grew from fear, imagination, or the simple need to make sense of the unknown is difficult to unravel now. The ambiguity around such stories seems woven into the storm itself, lingering at the edges of the firelight. You stand again and move toward the bed, though you do not lie down yet. You remain alert, head angled toward the north wall. The storm howls, snow presses, the rafters creak, but nothing knocks or thuds. The mysterious sound seems satisfied with startling you twice. You step closer to the door, listening for any hint of movement outside. Only wind, only snow, only the muffled thrum of winter working its relentless craft. The door trembles lightly with each gust, but no new weight leans against it. You let out a slow, steady breath and decide the danger has passed. You return to the bed, easing down into the quilts, grateful for their warmth. The straw mattress rustles beneath you in a soft lull. The goat lets out a quiet murmur, perhaps dreaming. One of the chickens clicks its beak before settling again. You sink deeper into the bedding, letting your mind ease out of its alertness. The storm continues its noisy siege, but inside the cabin the atmosphere feels calmer. You close your eyes once more, your breath warming the quilt near your chin. The thump came and went, the cabin absorbed it. The night moves on. Still as you drift back toward that hazy boundary of sleep, part of your mind remains open, listening carefully. Because in a winter cabin, surrounded by a furious storm, even one unexpected noise can lodge itself in your thoughts, lingering until the morning light reveals what the night kept hidden. You lie still for a long moment after the last thump fades into the storm, waiting for something else to follow. Nothing comes, only the same low, relentless breath of winter pressing itself across the cabin walls. You rest your head back on the straw mattress and stare at the faint glow trembling on the rafters. The fire's light looks smaller now, like it has curled in on itself to conserve strength. You pull the quilts higher and inhale slowly. The cold brushes your cheeks again, reminding you that the night is nowhere near finished. Your thoughts drift to the world beyond the cabin. Not the snowdrifts or the groaning trees or the invisible weight settling across the roof. You think instead about the people who might be weathering this storm somewhere out there. Not close enough to hear them, but close enough that in another life you might have shared a warm drink or traded news, or simply sat together on a calmer night. Frontier communities often spanned large distances with neighbours scattered across forests, hills, fields, and hidden valleys. A cabin beyond the next ridge might be the nearest sign of human life, yet still feel impossibly far away in a storm like this. You imagine one such cabin, now dark but safe, its own small fire glowing in the centre of someone's world. You picture a family gathered near the hearth, all bundled in layers, much like you listening to the storm while hoping their roof holds. You wonder what they're feeling this very moment. Maybe relief that the animals are sheltered. Maybe worry that the woodpile is shrinking too quickly. Maybe exhaustion settling into their bones as they take turns tending their own fire. The thought flickers around your mind like a candle flame. You sit up, quilt spilling across your lap, and gaze at the dim window. The snow pressed against it does not let in any real sight, only a soft, muted hint of movement as the storm swirls. You stand slowly and walk toward it, each step sinking slightly into the straw scattered on the floor. When you reach the window, you place your palm gently against the frame. The cold grips your skin instantly. You lean your forehead close to the paper, listening. There is no sound of voices, no distant call, no faint echo of a neighbour's presence, only the rushing, smothered hush of snow. Yet you cannot shake the thought of those other cabins hidden across the dark. Winter storms often isolated families for days, sometimes weeks, cutting them off, not just physically, but emotionally. People wrote about the uneasy quiet that settled when they realized they would not see another human being for a long stretch of time. Some found peace in that solitude. Others felt the edges of loneliness sharpen around them. You pull back from the window and wrap your arms around yourself. The idea of being so far from anyone else touches something in your chest, both heavy and strangely comforting. You walk toward the hearth again, slowing when the warm glow reaches your toes. The fire's breath mingles with yours as you kneel beside it. For a moment you simply stare at the embers, each one like a tiny ember of companionship in an enormous wilderness. You pick up a stick from the kindling pile and stir the coals lightly. A spark flares upward, twisting slowly in the heated air before fading. You place another small piece of wood onto the fire, letting it catch on its own time. As the flames grow, you lean back on your hands, letting the heat push against your chilled skin. You breathe out, letting the warmth settle you. Your thoughts return to those distant cabins. In some accounts from early settlements, people spoke of leaving lanterns in their windows during storms, not because anyone would likely see them, but because the gesture brought comfort. A symbolic way of saying, "We are here, we are safe, we are waiting for the thaw." No one could agree on where the tradition started. Some families swore it came from old country customs. Others believed it was simply a natural response to the quiet fear storms created. But the image of those lanterns lingers in your imagination now. You glance toward the window again and imagine placing a lantern there. The thought brings a strange warmth to your chest. Even if no one could possibly see it through the snow, the gesture feels meaningful. A reminder that you are not alone in the world, only temporarily separated. You rise from the hearth, still wrapped in your quilt, and cross the cabin to the small shelf near the door. On it sits a simple lantern with a soot-darkened glass panel. You pick it up carefully, holding it by its cold metal handle. The interior wick is stiff, but still usable. You carry the lantern to the fire and let the heat help soften the wax. After a moment, you coax a flame from the hearth onto a sliver of kindling and use it to light the wick. The lantern glows softly, a warmer, gentler light than the fire. You stand slowly and walk to the window. The animals lift their heads as you pass. The goat huffs softly. One chicken rustles its feathers before settling again. You hold the lantern near the window and watch the soft halo of its light press against the opaque snow outside. It does not reach far. It cannot. But something about the glow comforts you. You hang the lantern on a small peg beside the window. The warm light pools across the wall and floor, forming a soft golden circle in the dimness. You step back and gaze at it, feeling a subtle calm flow through you. It is as if the lantern anchors the cabin in the storm, reminding the night that someone is inside awake alive. You walk back toward the hearth and settle onto the stool, letting the fire paint your face in shifting amber. You draw your quilt close again and rest your elbows on your knees. The storm pushes against the walls with stubborn strength, but the lantern's glow hums beside you quietly. The fire crackles, the animals sigh, and you in this small wooden shelter feel the distance between yourself and the outside world grow less cold. Your thoughts drift once more to the unseen neighbours beyond the ridges and trees. The lantern's warm halo makes it easier to imagine that in some other cabin, someone else might be sitting near their own fire, thinking of distant households in the storm. You take a slow breath and watch the lantern's glow shimmer. Isolation in storms like this could make simple gestures feel profound. Even the idea of others unseen but enduring could soften the sharp edges of the night. The thought brings you quiet comfort as you sit beside the fire, watching the cabin hold firm while the storm carves its wild patterns outside. You tighten your quilt around your shoulders and let the warmth fill your chest. The night is long, but not as empty as it first seemed. Somewhere out there, other hearths glow against the winter. And in your corner of the storm, your own small lights answer back. You settle back onto the bed, the lantern's warm glow softening the room into a gentle gold that seems to melt into the fire's ember-red flicker. Your breath slows. The weight of the quilts becomes familiar again, comforting in a way you did not expect after so many interruptions. Outside, the storm continues its endless conversation with the cabin walls, a steady rise and fall that almost mimics the rhythm of waves striking a distant shore. You close your eyes for a moment and let the sound carry you into a calm that sits somewhere between peace and fatigue. But you are not ready to sleep yet, not fully. Your mind is too alert, too tethered to the noises and the flickering shadows, and the cold settling deeper into the corners of the room. You open your eyes slowly. The fire has settled into a glow that pulses faintly like the slow breathing of something trying to rest. The smoke has thinned even more, drifting toward the top of the chimney in smooth, steady ribbons. You turn onto your side, laying your head on the pillow that shifts with a soft crunch of flattened rags. Your thoughts wander again, drifting into the quiet realm of the early morning hours, that strange place where wakefulness and memory blur together. You think about the day you had before the storm arrived. The work you finished, the tools you used, the chores that seemed endless. Nothing extraordinary, but the memory of it feels distant now that the world is wrapped in snow and darkness. You stretch your legs beneath the quilts. The warmth that gathers there is thin but welcome. Your body begins to sink into that half-conscious state where thoughts float more freely. You picture the path outside the cabin, buried under drift so deep that even your own footprints have disappeared. The idea fascinates you. How quickly the world erases marks you once thought permanent. A faint creak from the rafters nudges your attention upward. The sound is soft, like a whispered reminder that the storm is still shaping the night. You listen for another creak, but none follows. Instead, you hear a subtle little hum inside your mind, the same one that often visits during winter nights when you're exhausted. It feels oddly pleasant, as if your thoughts are loosening, drifting like tiny flakes inside your head. You let the feeling carry you. The quiet of the cabin, the storm's steady voice, the heat from the fire, they all blend into a gentle lull that makes your muscles soften. Nights like this were often described by early families as strange pockets of clarity. People wrote about moments where everything felt unusually sharp or oddly distant. Those descriptions never matched perfectly across different accounts, leaving the true nature of such experiences open to interpretation. Your own version now feels like a slow drift into a warm fog. You breathe deeply, letting your lungs fill with air that tastes faintly of smoke and wool. Your eyelids grow heavier. Yet your mind continues wandering, tracing thoughts you could not begin to explain. Small things surface: the shape of the wooden spoon you used earlier, the sound of the bucket handle against the barrel, the exact pattern of straw beneath your pillow. Unimportant details, yet each feels vivid. The fire gives a tiny crackle, and the lantern flickers as if stirred by the movement. You glance around the room again. The goat is curled into a fluffy mound, its breath calm and steady. One of the chickens has tucked its head beneath its wing, its little body rising and falling like a slow heartbeat. The presence of living creatures around you adds a soothing weight to the night. Their quiet breathing anchors you, reminding you that life continues in small and steady ways. You shift again, letting your arms slide under the pillow. The mattress rustles and the sound blends with the storm in a hypnotic way. You imagine warmth rising from the earth itself, even though you know the ground beneath the cabin is frozen solid. That thought gives rise to another. In certain regions, winter cabins were sometimes built partially into slopes or hillsides to take advantage of the earth's insulation. Not here, though. Your cabin stands alone, fully exposed, relying only on its logs and your diligence to keep the cold beyond its walls. Another image forms behind your eyes, unbidden, a long winter road stretching through the forest lined with the silhouettes of snow-laden pines. The vision feels so real that you almost smell the crisp air of the imagined path. You know such mental wanderings are common when sleep hovers near but does not fully arrive. Minds tend to drift through scenes they have never truly seen, stitching fragments of memory and imagination into landscapes that feel both familiar and foreign. You draw a slow breath, the kind that warms your throat and quiets your thoughts. For a moment, everything in the cabin seems suspended. The fire does not crackle, the wind does not roar, even the animals fall silent. You feel like you're floating, anchored only by the gentle weight of the quilts draped across your chest. Then, without warning, another memory rises, the kind you did not expect. You think of stories older generations told about winter nights, tales of wanderers in the snow whose footsteps disappeared instantly behind them. Some of those tales spoke of travellers who never returned, but others described mysterious figures who appeared just long enough to offer guidance or warnings before vanishing into the storm again. People argued for years over whether such stories were meant to comfort children or warn adults, but no one could settle on a single meaning. The ambiguity lingers now, swirling through your mind, much like the snow swirling outside. You blink, letting the image fade. The fire's glow brings you back. It spreads across the wall in warm ripples, softening the edges of the cabin shadows. You pull the quilts up around your shoulders and shift onto your back, closing your eyes, but not yet surrendering to sleep. Your thoughts drift again. You imagine the storm outside as a living thing pacing around the cabin, pressing its icy hands against the logs, testing each seam. It is a strange comfort to picture the storm as something with shape and behaviour. It makes the night feel less like a formless threat and more like a challenge you're capable of weathering. The goat exhales loudly, almost a snort, pulling you from your drifting thoughts. You smile faintly. The chickens shuffle again, settling themselves more comfortably. Their tiny noises weave into the song of the night, offering a kind of steady reassurance that no matter how cold or how dark the world becomes outside, warmth and life still hold their place inside the cabin. Your eyelids flutter. You feel the weight of the day settling deeper into your body. Your breathing evens out. For the first time tonight, sleep begins to feel possible. Not guaranteed, not imminent, but possible. You turn your head slightly and watch the lantern's glow blur softly across your vision. The quilts settle around you like the hands of someone tucking you in gently. The cold lingers at the edges of the bed, but it no longer feels sharp. You take one more breath long and slow, feeling it warm your chest. You're not alone out here, not really. Others endure this same night beyond the hills, beyond the trees, beyond the reach of your sight. The thought settles you, smoothing the last of your tension. The storm continues, the fire hums, and you drift somewhere between rest and reflection, letting the night carry you onward in its slow, quiet tide. You drift in that hazy quiet for several long breaths, your thoughts drifting closer to sleep with each gentle rise and fall of your chest. But as the fire lowers itself into a bed of deep red coals, a chill brushes your cheek, a small, delicate touch. You pull the quilts tighter and angle your head toward the window, sensing a shift in the air. Something subtle, something almost fragile. You open your eyes fully, letting the dim glow guide you. The fire has calmed into a faint pulse, its warmth reaching only a short distance from the hearth. The far side of the cabin feels colder now, like the darkness has thickened. You sit up slowly, your fingers pressing into the straw mattress, and glance toward the bed's edge. A pale shimmer catches your attention. You lean closer. There along the upper layer of the quilt, closest to your face, tiny crystals sparkle in the lantern's low light. Frost. Fine, feathery frost. You brush the back of your knuckle against it. The delicate ice melts instantly under your touch, leaving a faint damp ring in the fabric. You lift the quilt and see more along the edges, tiny clusters forming wherever your breath pooled, before drifting upward. You exhale, watching the warm cloud rise into the cold air. The moisture clings to the air only a moment before disappearing. That brief lifetime is enough for frost to grow on the quilts during the coldest nights. Records from households in harsh climates mention waking to find thin crystals tracing the outlines of blankets, windows, and even sleeping faces. You always assumed such mentions were exaggerations, but tonight proves otherwise. You slide your hand along the quilt, feeling the faint roughness where the frost clings. You lift a corner and hold it close to the lantern. The ice looks like a miniature forest of white grass, each blade delicate enough to crumble with a breath. You almost laugh quietly at the idea that something so fragile could grow in a place where the wind outside feels strong enough to strip bark from trees. As you study the frost, you notice something else. The cold is pushing deeper into the cabin than before. It creeps beneath the bed, spills from the corners, and stretches across the floor in invisible rivers. You slide one foot from under the quilts and set it on the floorboards. The shock sends a shiver all the way up your leg. You lift your foot at once, rubbing your toes through the thick wool sock. You stand carefully wrapping the quilt around your shoulders and step toward the center of the cabin. The cold hangs lower here, hugging the floor as if the storm outside has seeped through the logs and settled where warmth is weakest. You squat and place your palm lightly on the floorboards. The wood feels as though it has not known warmth in days. You rise and walk toward the window again. The oiled paper has grown even dimmer, nearly pure white from the snow packed against it. You lift your hand toward it and feel not just cold, but a radiating kind of stillness. It is the stillness of deep snow, pressed so thick that even sound becomes muffled. You take a slow breath and watch your breath cloud again. A small thought drifts into your mind. In certain remote regions, people occasionally slept with cloth wrapped lightly around their mouths and noses during harsh storms, hoping to warm their own breath and avoid frost forming on blankets or skin. Some accounts describe this habit in detail, though not everyone agreed on its necessity. The lack of consensus still leaves the idea floating in historical grey space, never fully confirmed nor dismissed. You rub your hands briskly together and return to the bed. Frost has settled along the quilt where you shifted earlier, glimmering like tiny stars. You brush some of it away, though new crystals begin forming almost immediately as your warm breath touches the cold air hovering above the fabric. You watch the ice spread slowly, delicate as lace forming along the creases. The fire crackles faintly, reminding you it needs attention. You step toward the hearth quilt trailing behind you and crouch beside the embers. The warmth hits your face with a soft, welcome sigh. You place a small piece of wood on the coals, listening to the faint hiss as the log warms. It takes only a moment for the edges to glow, then curl, then catch. As the flame strengthens, you turn and look at the frost on your bedding. The glow of the fire reaches it from across the room, making the crystals shimmer like tiny glass shards embedded in the quilt. The sight is oddly beautiful, though the reminder of the cold settling inside the cabin sends another subtle shiver down your spine. You return to bed, carefully sliding beneath the blankets and pulling them snug around your shoulders. The frost melts slightly where your warmth touches it, leaving faint damp patches. You tuck the quilt close and let your breath warm the air around your face. Outside, the storm renews its force as if circling back for another round. The cabin responds with soft groans and shifting wood, but inside you create your own bubble of warmth, fragile as it may be. The frost along the quilt continues to shimmer as your eyes grow heavier. You settle deeper your breath, drifting upward into the cold, knowing it will turn to frost again before long. And yet you drift towards sleep, accepting the strange beauty of watching ice bloom on the very blankets meant to keep you warm. You rub your eyes, gently feeling the faint sting left behind by the frost you brushed from the quilt. The fire crackles in the distance, its glow dimming again into a pool of deep orange. You sit up slowly, letting the quilts fall from your shoulders in soft folds, and the cold rushes in as if it had been waiting right beside you. Your breath gathers in front of your lips in a slow plume. The hour feels late, but sleep still hovers just out of reach, tugged back again and again by the shifting demands of the cabin. You swing your legs over the straw mattress and place your feet on the boards. They feel icy, almost as if you are stepping onto stone left out under the moon. You rise carefully and shuffle toward the fire. The embers glow, but the flames have waned to tired flickers that sway only when a draft slips through the cabin. You crouch beside the hearth, leaning close so the remaining warmth can kiss your cheeks. It helps, but only in the most delicate way. You lift the kettle from its hook, feeling its weight, and the pleasant warmth lingering in the iron. You pour a small trickle of hot water from it into a wooden cup to test how well the embers still work. The steam curls upward, forming a gentle cloud above your hands, and for a moment you simply breathe it in. Nights like this demanded near constant attention to the fire. Countless homes recorded the struggle of keeping embers alive till morning, especially during storms that swallowed every spark of warmth not fiercely protected. You set the cup aside and poke gently at the embers with the wooden poker. The coal bed shifts, glowing in patches like little suns buried in ash. You push them together, coaxing them to share their strength. They respond slowly, deepening in colour. You reach for a small split log and nestle it across the coals, making sure it rests at the right angle to catch. The log hisses faintly, then smoulders, then begins to glow at the edges. As you watch the fire gather itself again, a faint curl of scent drifts upward. Something sweet and earthy. The log must have come from a tree that carried resin in peculiar pockets. You inhale the aroma, letting it settle in the air for a moment. People often stored certain woods aside for winter nights because burning them produced warmer flames or gentler smoke. Some even claimed certain trees carried a comforting scent that eased sleepless minds. Whether that idea came from tradition or imagination is hard to pinpoint, but the warmth you feel in your chest now makes the belief easy to understand. You sit on your heels and watch the flames grow steadier. The fire begins to stretch upward, casting longer ribbons of light across the floor. Your fingers relax as the heat steadies. Once the flames catch fully, you lift the kettle back onto its hook, listening to the faint bubbling of water warming again. When you rise, your joints protest slightly from the cold. You stretch your arms, roll your shoulders, and step back to admire the fire. It has regained some of its strength, flickering with more comfort than before. You stand close to it, letting the warmth soak into your clothes. It feels good to remember what heat is capable of. Your eyes lift toward the chimney opening. The smoke rises steadily now, forming thin, delicate lines that twist upward before disappearing. You release a small breath of relief. Storm nights sometimes disrupted the draft so severely that smoke hesitated or even sank back down. Old accounts mention nights when smoke spilled into the cabin so heavily that families opened doors despite the blizzard just to let the air recalibrate. What exactly caused these unpredictable shifts remains uncertain. Theories about wind angles, chimney shapes, and even temperature layers float around, without settling into any single explanation. You walk to the supply of wood stacked beside the hearth and select 2 smaller pieces to keep near for later. When you place them on the stone, their faint scent of bark and damp earth catches you off guard. You wipe your hands on your trousers and turn to face the cabin. The lantern glows warmly beside the window. Frost sparkles faintly on the quilts. The animals remain bundled together in their corner, their soft breath steady and reassuring. You move slowly toward the bed again, feeling the chill cling to you less persistently, now that the fire has revived. When you reach the quilts, you slide beneath them, pulling them up to your collar. They feel heavy, comforting, and warm enough to trap the heat you gathered near the hearth. You glance across the cabin one more time. The fire now casts a steady, pulsing orange glow against the far wall. Shadows sway behind the rafters, drifting with the gentle motion of flames. Everything feels calmer, still cold, still vulnerable to the storm outside, but calmer in a way that lets your muscles loosen. Your breath forms a faint cloud near your face. It rises, then disappears. The quilts retain their warmth longer this time, cradling your chest and shoulders. You nestle deeper into them, letting your legs stretch across the straw mattress. The softness of the straw and the weight of the blankets bring a familiar comfort that travels through you like a slow wave. With the fire revived, the cold recedes slightly. The frost on the quilt edges softens its delicate crystals, melting back into faint dampness. You let your eyes drift toward the lantern light again. It sways gently with the movement of the air, though the flame remains steady inside its glass panel. You close your eyes slowly. The cabin settles. The wind outside continues its long sweeping cry, but inside the world feels more manageable. You breathe evenly, letting warmth linger in your lungs. The fire renews itself at your back. The warmth spreads slowly, and with it comes the feeling that even in the midst of a winter storm that has swallowed the outside world, you've created a fragile pocket of comfort, one that will carry you through the next stretch of the night. You drift in and out of a shallow calm, your body warming slowly beneath the quilts, while your mind hovers just above sleep. The fire's glow pulses against your eyelids in shades of faint gold and orange. Eventually a small restlessness pulls you awake again. You open your eyes to the stillness inside the cabin, but something feels different. The air carries a new tension, thin and electric, as if the storm has changed its tone while you rested. You sit up and listen. The wind has grown sharper, no longer a steady roar, but a series of forceful bursts that strike the cabin like impatient hands. Each gust forces snow against the walls with such weight that it sounds like sand pouring out of a giant hourglass. You pull the quilts aside and rise carefully, your feet touching the chilled boards. A tight knot settles in your stomach. Whatever waits outside the door tonight feels more powerful than the storm's earlier phases. You wrap your quilt around your shoulders and move toward the entrance. You do not intend to open it, of course. You simply need to hear, to sense, to feel what surrounds the cabin. When you place your palm against the wood, the entire door quivers under the blow of a sudden gust. The vibration travels up your arm, making you tighten your grip on the quilt. You lean your forehead gently against the door and listen. The wind lets out a shrill, icy cry that spirals downward as if rushing through invisible corridors before slamming into the land. Snow scratches across the threshold, sliding in thick sheets along the outer walls. You pull back slightly, imagining drifts climbing as high as your waist outside. In some northern regions, people recorded storms so fierce that the snow reached halfway up their doors overnight, leaving them trapped inside until the sky calmed. Their descriptions vary widely, leaving uncertainty about exactly how common such events were, but the idea lingers now in your thoughts. You step away from the door and move toward the window. The lantern's glow across the room reveals a surface now almost uniformly white. The oiled paper looks thicker, somehow stuffed with snow pressed against it from the outside. You lean close and bring your hand to the frame. The cold bites instantly into your skin, sharper than before. You imagine pressing the window outward and meeting nothing but a solid wall of snow. You retreat a few steps, your breath trembling in front of you. The storm's strength is undeniable now. It presses against the cabin like a living force. You turn toward your boots near the door, their edges frozen stiff, where melting snow had earlier seeped and cooled. You wonder how long it would take to dig them out if dawn came and you needed to leave. The thought stays with you heavy and stubborn. The fire snaps behind you as a pocket of sap inside the new log bursts. You turn sharply at the sound, then release a breath of relief. You walk to the hearth and crouch beside it, letting the heat warm your face. You hold your fingers to the embers and feel life returning to them slowly. The flames dance with renewed energy, crackling as if pleased to be fed earlier. As you stare at the hearth, you notice again how unevenly the heat spreads through the cabin. The air near the ceiling holds more warmth, while the floor traps the bitter cold. People in cabins often used low stools near the fire not just for convenience, but because sitting directly on the ground robbed them of precious warmth. Some left wooden planks near the hearth specifically to rest their feet and ward off numbness. Such little habits often determined how comfortably or how miserably the night unfolded. You rise again and walk back toward the window. The storm hasn't slowed. If anything, it seems more determined. The snow on the outside shifts with a dull, pressured groan, as if adjusting its weight. You angle your ear toward the wall and hear the deep, muffled slide of a drift collapsing and reshaping itself. The sound is unsettling, like something heavy shifting in the dark. You bring the lantern closer to the window, hanging it on a nearby peg so its warm light falls across the snow-packed surface. The glow softens the intensity of the whiteness, but does little to reveal what lies beyond. You imagine the landscape, the trees bowed under deep frost, the ground buried in sculpted waves, the world reshaped into an unbroken blanket that stretches far beyond the clearing. A faint rustle near the animals draws your attention. The goat stirs but does not rise. Its ears twitch, then settle again. The chickens shift and murmur in their sleep. Their calmness reassures you, even though the storm outside booms like distant drums. You move toward the door once more, drawn by a need to feel the storm's force without exposing yourself to it. The wood shivers under each blast of wind. You can feel frost collecting on the hinges from the outside. You rest your hand below the latch, absorbing its cold through the quilt wrapped around you. You imagine opening the door only to be met with a wall of snow taller than you, unbroken and compact. You take a step back. Even the idea feels heavy. You pace slowly across the cabin quilt, dragging across the floor, your steps soft. Your breath puffs in front of you with each exhale. The air tastes sharply cold near the walls and far warmer near the fire. You choose a spot halfway between the two, letting your body sense the strange balance of temperatures as the storm shapes the night. The wind outside rises into a sharp crescendo, then drops away suddenly, leaving a brief hollow silence in its wake. You hold your breath, listening. When the wind returns, it is louder than before. The cabin creaks deeply, logs groaning under the pressure. You place your hand on the nearest wall, letting the vibrations move through your fingers. There is strength there, old strength, but even the toughest timber bends against a storm of this scale. You take one more long breath and make your way back to the bed, easing beneath the quilts, with a slow, practiced motion. The bedding holds the faint warmth left from your body earlier. You tuck the quilts tightly around your chest and draw your knees closer to retain more heat. Outside, the storm continues shaping the world with unrelenting force. Inside, the lantern glows softly beside the window, a small, stubborn light pressing gently against a sea of white. You settle deeper into the warmth, listening to the storm's shifting voice, feeling both the profound isolation and the quiet reassurance of this fragile shelter. The world is buried out there, but in here the fire survives, and so do you. You sleep only in thin threads, drifting and resurfacing until a new heaviness settles across the cabin. Not a sound this time, a weight, a sense that the night has thickened into something denser than before. When you open your eyes, the fire is little more than a faint red glow buried beneath its own ash. The air bites sharply at your face. Your first breath stings your throat. Morning has not yet arrived, but the cabin itself feels different, as if the storm has pressed it deeper into the earth. You know what that means. The storm has reached a point where you will not be able to wait for daylight to begin the next task. Snow builds quickly in conditions like this, and if you want to step outside come morning, you will have to clear at least some of it now. You lie very still for a moment, listening to the storm rumbling thickly beyond the walls. You picture the drifts piled high against the door, pushing inward, testing the hinges. Your body resists the thought of facing it, but the cold nudges you, insistently reminding you what must be done. You pull the quilts back and stand on the floorboards. The cold shoots instantly into your soles. You curl your toes inside your socks and pull the nearest layers around your shoulders. Your breath forms a pale haze before fading into the dimness. You take a few slow steps toward the door, your muscles stiff and reluctant. The animals stir faintly as you pass. The goat lifts its head and sneezes softly, as if scolding you for disturbing the air. You set your hand upon the wooden latch. The cold radiating from it makes you wince. For a moment you hesitate, then you lift it carefully. The latch rises with a muffled creak, stuttering slightly as if frozen. You push the door just enough for a sliver of the outside to reveal itself. It barely moves. You press harder. The wood shifts only an inch. The thick wall of snow holds it fast from the outside. You try again using your shoulder. The door budges, but not much more than before. You exhale slowly, bracing against the frame. You knew there would be snow, but you did not expect it to pack itself so firmly overnight. You return to the hearth and grab the small iron shovel leaning by the stones. Its handle is cold enough to sting. You shake your hands and tuck them under your arms for warmth. People living in isolated cabins often kept tools indoors precisely for nights like this when storms sealed the door shut from the outside. The placement of such tools was not random. They were stored within arm's reach so you would not have to cross the cold floor searching for them. You go back to the door, place your shoulder against it again and push with steady pressure. This time the door gives a little more. You wedge the shovel into the narrow gap and pull downward, letting bits of compacted snow drop inside. It falls in heavy clumps that thump against the floor. The snow is dense, more like wet sand than powder. You scoop it aside with the shovel and try again. The door opens another inch. A wave of icy air pours through the widening gap. You gasp as the cold rushes over your face and neck. You pull the quilt tighter across your shoulders, but the cold still slips underneath it, like a determined intruder. You lean into the door again, using the shovel to break apart the wall of snow until you can open the entrance wide enough to squeeze through. Finally, with one last push, the door swings outward just enough for you to slip outside. The freezing wind assaults you, instantly slicing through your layers. You grip the door frame and lower yourself onto an uneven mound of snow. The world outside is almost unrecognizable. The storm has carved enormous dunes of white across the land. The clearing around the cabin has turned into a swirling field of drifts, some rising nearly to your waist. The wind blows hard enough to sting your cheeks and steal your breath. You squat low, shielding your face with your arm. The sky is a churning mass of dark grey, and the air is filled with snowflakes so fine that they feel like needles. You turn toward the door and begin digging. Each scoop of snow falls heavily from the shovel, forming small mounds beside the steps. Your breath comes out in quick bursts. Flakes cling to your eyelashes and coat your scarf. The work is slow, almost absurd in such conditions, but necessary. If you allow the entrance to be buried entirely, you might find yourself trapped by morning. You pause once, leaning on the shovel, and glance around. The shapes of trees blur behind a curtain of falling snow. It is difficult to tell where the land ends and the storm begins. In some rural communities, people trained themselves to gauge distances by sound when sight became useless during storms. Stories mention how a familiar tree barn or fence could be located based solely on how the wind shifted around it. Whether this was an intentional skill or simply the natural instinct of those living close to the land remains uncertain. But the idea makes you listen now more intently. The wind hits the cabin again with a long, steady push. You hear the structure groan behind you, not in fear, but in weary effort. You resume shoveling, carving a narrow trench away from the door. Snow piles beside it in small, uneven walls. Your arms burn with the effort, but the motion warms you in a way the fire cannot. As you work, you notice something glimmer faintly beneath the top layer of snow. A patch of ice, perhaps, or a piece of bark carried by the wind. You brush it aside with your boot and keep digging. The cold has numbed your fingertips even inside thick mittens. You stop briefly to flex your hands. When you finally step back, a narrow path sits carved between the door and the open space beyond. It is shallow compared to the drifts surrounding it, but enough to prevent the door from sealing shut again. You nod to yourself, satisfied despite the sting in your eyes and the ache in your arms. You turn and step back into the cabin, pushing the door shut against the wind. Inside, the warmth, however faint, wraps around you like a long-awaited embrace. You stand still for a moment, letting the cold melt from your face and fingers. Snow falls from your boots and cloak in small piles. You place the shovel beside the hearth and approach the animals. The goat blinks at you with sleepy curiosity. The chickens shift quietly, unimpressed by your ordeal. You smile faintly and return to the bed. As you slide beneath the quilts, your body shivers in the fading chill. The fire glows weakly, waiting for more wood. You tuck the quilts tight under your chin and listen as the storm continues to reshape the world outside, knowing you have cleared just enough space to greet the morning when it finally comes. You settle beneath the quilts once more, breathing through the sting the cold left in your lungs. Your fingers ache faintly from gripping the shovel, and your shoulders throb with a dull, pulsing tiredness. You close your eyes, only intending to rest them for a moment, but the warmth you regained coaxes you nearer to sleep than you expect. Before slumber can claim you fully, a sound stirs the edge of your awareness, a soft, brief rumble from outside, followed by a muted vibration that rolls faintly through the floorboards. You open your eyes slowly. The fire has regained its glow, casting warm, wavy patterns on the rafters. The animals shift in their hay nest, each movement subtle but noticeable. The goat lifts its head and gives a low, uncertain bleat, a sound that draws your attention at once. Animals often react to outdoor disturbances before humans register them, and the goat's alertness pushes you upright despite your fatigue. You ease from the bed, pulling a quilt around your shoulders, and step toward the door with deliberate slowness. Your boots, still damp from the snow you brushed off earlier, sit near the hearth. You slip them on again, teeth gritting at the cold leather. The rumbling sound outside returns faint but present, and this time it carries a different timbre. Not wind, not falling snow, something else. You place your palm against the door. The wood is still painfully cold, but there's no vibration now. You lean in closer, listening with all the focus your tired mind can muster. After a long stretch of silence, another sound arrives, quieter, more rhythmic. A muffled lowing. You blink in surprise and pull back from the door. That unmistakable voice belongs to cattle. You move quickly to the small window and lift the lantern from its peg. The warm glow reaches the oiled paper, illuminating a bright sheet of white pressed against the outside. You angle the lantern and try to see beyond the thickness of frost. Nothing. Only the shimmering blur of snow. But you hear it again, the muffled, plaintive call of a cow. You exhale sharply. The cattle you sheltered earlier in the season, kept in the lean-to beside the cabin, must be struggling now. The storm has grown so fierce that even their shelter may no longer protect them adequately. You feel a knot tighten in your stomach. The lean-to's walls are thinner than the cabin's and the roof lower. If snow has piled too heavily against it, your animals could be trapped or in danger of freezing. You pull your coat from its peg and wrap it around your shoulders, then fasten the quilt atop it like a thick shawl. Your breath spills out in a pale cloud that trembles under the lantern's light. You grab the lantern in one hand, and in the other you clutch a small wood-handled mallet useful for knocking ice loose or freeing stuck latches. Your boots crunch softly across the floor as you approach the door again. This time the cold seems even sharper when you lift the latch. A narrow stream of snow trickles inside as the door cracks open. You push harder, using your shoulder to brace against the drift. The door gives slowly and a biting wave of cold pours inside. You step out into the storm. Instantly, snow blasts against your face with such force that you gasp involuntarily. The wind steals half of your breath before it leaves your lips. You clutch the lantern, tightly shielding the flame with your body. The world outside the cabin is a chaotic swirl of white, the air so dense with snow that visibility collapses into mere inches. You bend low, pressing forward through the cold. The cattle's shelter stands only a few steps from the cabin, but tonight it feels a world away. You advance one slow step at a time, boots sinking into snow that reaches nearly to your knees. The lantern's glow bounces off swirling flakes, illuminating nothing but the agonizing closeness of the storm. Another call emerges from a head, longer this time, edged with distress. You push harder, carving a path through the snow until your hand finally finds the wooden beam of the lean-to. You breathe relief into your scarf. The structure groans under the snow piled against it, its roof slumping under the weight. You hoist the lantern higher and see the outline of the doorway. Snow has filled half the entrance, forming a slanted mound that blocks the lower half of the animal's space. You dig with your gloved hands, first scooping snow away in frantic, clumsy swipes. The cold bites instantly into your skin, even through the gloves, but you keep going, clearing the entrance enough to push the drift aside. When you finally manage to carve a narrow opening, you crouch low and peer inside. 3 pairs of eyes stare back at you, wide and startled. 2 cows and a calf stand tightly pressed together, their breath rising in thick, trembling clouds that slide along the frosted interior. The calf is shivering. You push the lantern forward, lighting the small space more clearly. The animals are frightened but unharmed. Their shelter, however, is dangerously strained. Snow is piled so high along the back wall that the structure leans slightly inward. You know you cannot fix the building in the middle of a storm, but you can reduce the snow pressing against it. You retreat outside and begin shoveling with your hands again, scraping snow away from the wall. The wind cuts your face, slicing at your cheeks with icy knives. You work quickly, pushing snow aside in frantic sweeps. Each handful feels heavier than the last, but you keep going. You cannot let the roof collapse on the cattle that depend on you. A piece of the snowpack shifts, suddenly sliding down the wall with a deep, low swoosh. You stumble backward, nearly losing your grip on the lantern. The snow cascades onto the ground, releasing pressure from the structure. You drop to your knees, exhausted but relieved. The lean-to seems steadier now. Your breath steadies as well. You stand again and peer inside one more time. The cows amble nervously, hooves shuffling in the straw. You lower the lantern, letting its warm glow wash over them. Their breathing slows and the calf presses closer to its mother. You nod once, satisfied for the moment. You back away from the entrance and push through the snow toward the cabin. The door barely stands visible in the storm, just a faint rectangle of darkness outlined in white. You force your way toward it and finally slip inside, panting, trembling, and half covered in snow. Warmth hits your face weakly but lovingly. You close the door behind you and sag against it, letting the cold melt slowly off your coat. Snow drips to the floor in small patches. The goat watches you with calm curiosity. The chickens remain settled, oblivious to the crisis you just faced. You peel away the wet quilt and hang it on a peg near the fire. Your fingers ache with returning warmth. You sit heavily on the stool beside the hearth, holding your hands toward the flame. The storm continues its wild ballet outside, reshaping everything with each fierce breath. But now at least your cattle are safe, your shelter still stands, and the small world inside your cabin glows with life again. You draw the quilts back around your shoulders and return to the bed, every muscle exhausted but relieved. The night remains long, but you have met another challenge, and kept both yourself and your animals alive against winter's stubborn shifting fury. You lie back once more, breath slowing, as the warmth of the cabin crawls cautiously back into your limbs. The snow you carried inside has melted into small puddles near the door, their edges glistening under the lantern's gentle glow. Exhaustion pulls at your shoulders, but your mind refuses to settle. The storm has changed its pitch again. You can feel it in the floor, in the air, even in the faint tremble of the quilts. You roll onto your side and stare at the wall closest to the lean-to, half expecting the cattle's shelter to groan again. Instead, a new quiet reveals itself, the kind that sinks into the gaps of a long night, shaping the silence differently. You sit up carefully, rubbing your arms beneath the layers of fabric. The cabin looks unchanged, yet you sense something has shifted. A faint line of cold presses near the lowest row of logs. You walk to it, keeping your steps soft so as not to disturb the animals. When you place your hand on the wood, the cold touches your fingertips with a sharper edge than earlier. You press harder, and the sensation deepens. That edge tells you something subtle, but important. The storm has begun to test the cabin's construction in ways that reveal new vulnerabilities. Even in old letters and construction guides, builders often admitted that log homes developed trouble spots the longer they endured heavy weather. Some areas settled differently, or the ground beneath the structure shifted with frost, altering how the walls carried weight. You step back and scan the room, eyes drifting across the telltale marks left behind by years of repairs. The walls carry patches of clay and straw in shades that never perfectly matched. Hand-cut planks fill small spaces where wood once cracked or shrank. Some of these patches look steady, others appear tired. The variation reminds you that repairs were rarely uniform in cabins like this. Families often used whatever materials they could gather on short notice: bark, moss, worn cloth, even strips of old clothing nailed in place as makeshift insulation. You kneel near the newest patch and trace its outline with your fingertip. The surface feels rigid, slightly brittle from the cold. A faint draft whispers out from beneath it, brushing your knuckles. The storm outside shifts again, and the draft grows stronger, fluttering the small piece of cloth wedged between logs above the patch. You sigh quietly. Maintaining a log cabin through a winter storm was never a task you simply finished once. It was an ongoing dialogue between you and the structure, responding to each change as the storm reshaped the world. You rise and walk toward the hearth, grabbing a loose scrap of woolen cloth from the stool. It is worn thin from previous usage, but still serviceable. You fold it into a dense strip, press it into the gap near the patch, and feel the cold lessen slightly. It isn't a perfect fix, but it is enough to soften the draft. Families often relied on such tiny corrections, trusting that dozens of small solutions layered over many nights would add up to a larger survival. You return to the fire. The flames flicker low but steady, glowing like embers buried under red fabric. You reach for a narrow piece of wood, place it onto the coals, and watch as thin smoke curls around it. While you wait for the flame to catch, you stretch your back, easing the stiffness that digging through snow carved into your muscles. From the corner the goat rises, suddenly stamping softly. It stares toward the rear wall, ears tilted forward. You freeze. Animals rarely react without reason. The cabin falls into a taut stillness. The fire hums. The storm outside rattles faintly. Then, after a moment, the goat simply lowers its head and settles again. You exhale. Perhaps the animal simply resettled its weight. But the moment lingers in your mind. Some rural accounts describe livestock reacting to shifts in temperature or pressure before humans could detect anything. Whether those reactions were a form of instinctive prediction or mere coincidence is uncertain. You tilt your head, considering. The goat appears calm now, breathing evenly. The chickens snooze, feathers puffed in quiet contentment. That is reassurance enough for now. The fire finally catches the new piece of wood, brightening the room. The light stretches across the walls, revealing dust motes drifting downward from the rafters. You approach the ladder that leads to the loft, the low platform above the main room, once used for storage or extra sleeping space. You climb a step or two, wanting to examine the higher part of the wall. As you reach the higher rung, the cold intensifies. The loft always holds more cold than the lower level because warm air struggles to rise through a space filled with uneven beams and small gaps. You reach out and touch the upper logs. They feel colder than stone. You lower your lantern, slightly illuminating the wood. The surface glints with a faint layer of frost so thin it resembles dusted flour. You lean close and see tiny crystals forming along the grain. You imagine older families discovering the same frost pattern and murmuring among themselves about the state of their cabins. Some letters mention frost appearing in higher corners after particularly violent storms, though the explanations varied wildly. Some believed the cold descended from the roof beams themselves. Others thought it stemmed from drafts pulling moisture upward. Without a consistent answer across generations, the cause remains open to interpretation. You descend from the loft and return to the main floor where the fire's warmth begins to reclaim your skin. When you sit on the stool, your legs tremble with tiredness, and you let the warmth soak into them. You glance at the door again, imagining the snow piled against it. A part of you wonders how the exterior walls look now, likely reshaped by massive drifts that cling to the logs. You picture an outline of the cabin beneath all that snow, a small glowing square nearly swallowed by winter's icy breath. You close your eyes and imagine it from a distance. A lonesome speck of warmth in a vast white wilderness. Such images often appeared in winter sketches and writings from the era where travellers described cabins half buried, lit only by faint fire glow leaking through cracks. You rise and move to the window. You wipe your sleeve across the oiled paper, clearing a bit of frost from the inside. The light glows back at you dully. The outside remains encased in white. You press your knuckles lightly against the paper. It feels stiff, almost brittle as though frozen solid. The cold seeping through it burns slightly and you pull your hand back. You wrap your quilt tighter around yourself, return to the bed and sit upon its edge. A faint scent of smoke, hay and wool mingles around you. You sigh deeply, letting the tension drain from your body. The storm continues, but inside you have managed to carve stability from chaos once again. You stretch beneath the quilts, letting them settle around your body like layers of soft armour. The bed creaks gently as the straw shifts. You widen your toes inside your socks, letting them warm slowly. Your breath drifts up into a thin puff. A moment later, another puff. You watch them fade, knowing the cold will keep nibbling at the air until the storm finally loosens its grip. Yet despite that cold, despite the repairs, the shoveling, the anxious checking of animals, you feel a quiet strength settle inside your chest. You have tended the fire, you have kept the cabin standing, and you have answered each demand that winter has thrown at you. The night is not over, but your place within it feels steadier than before. You rest beneath the quilts for a few minutes longer, letting the warmth gather around your chest, until a subtle ache in your jaw reminds you that you have not eaten since before the storm truly settled in. Your stomach growls softly, a faint but insistent reminder that even in a night carved from ice and wind, the body demands its rituals. You open your eyes and stare at the dim cabin ceiling, watching the light from the fire pulse gently across the beams. Hunger is a familiar visitor on winter nights like this, when daylight feels like a distant memory and time stretches into long, uneven ribbons. You slide from beneath the quilts and set your feet on the cold floor. The wood snaps its chill up your legs like a warning, but you ignore it. You wrap the quilt around your shoulders and walk toward the small wooden table near the hearth. The goat lifts its head a fraction, blinking at your movement, then settles again. The chickens stir once, then quiet. On the table sits a small clay pot sealed with wax, a loaf of coarse bread wrapped in fabric, and a tin of dried beans. You lift the cloth from the bread and press your thumb against its crust. It feels firm and dry, but still edible. You break off a piece, the brittle edge flaking slightly. You bring it to your mouth and chew slowly. The flavour is simple, earthy, comforting in its familiarity. There were winters across the frontier when bread like this, dense and long-lasting, was the difference between endurance and decline. You chew another bite and feel the comforting weight settle in your stomach. But bread alone never feels like enough on a night this cold. You turn toward the fire and kneel beside it, reaching for the small stew pot resting on the stones. When you lift the lid, a faint warmth escapes. Inside, a small amount of leftover stew waits, a modest mixture of root vegetables and broth. Not much, but enough to coax heat back into your bones. You place the pot closer to the fire and stir it with a wooden spoon. The vegetables float in slow circles, soft and darkened by the broth. A faint steam begins to rise. The aroma fills the space near the hearth, earthy and rich. While stirring, you remember hearing old sayings about stew made in midwinter tasting better than any other. Some believed that ingredients boiled longer in cold weather absorbed flavours differently. Whether that idea came from careful observation or from simple appreciation during hungry nights is difficult to disentangle, but you find yourself believing it now as the scent grows stronger. You lift the spoon and take a sip. It is still lukewarm, but the warmth spreads through your mouth and down your throat in a way that makes you close your eyes. You let the comfort settle for a moment, then take another sip. The fire crackles beside you, and its glow seems to brighten just a little in response. With the stew warming near the coals, you return to the table to gather more ingredients. A small piece of salted pork rests on a wooden board. You cut off a sliver and drop it into the pot, letting the fat melt slowly. A handful of dried herbs tied with twine hangs from a peg overhead. You pinch off a bit of the brittle leaves and crumble them into the bubbling mixture. The scent spreads, mixing with the fire's warmth, and the chill of the room creating a fragrance that eases the lingering tension in your shoulders. You sit on the stool and watch the stew simmer. The pot shifts occasionally as bubbles rise. The lantern beside the window casts a soft golden glow across the wall, illuminating the faint crystal still forming near the quilt on your bed. The room feels larger when food warms over the fire, as if the aroma alone pushes the cold back into the corners. You lift the pot and pour the stew into a wooden bowl. You wrap the quilt tighter around your shoulders and sit near the hearth, holding the hot bowl carefully between your hands. The warmth spreads through your palms, soothing the ache in your fingers from earlier. You bring the first spoonful to your mouth, blowing gently before tasting it. The broth fills your senses with heat, the vegetables lending their mild sweetness. You savour each bite, feeling your body respond gratefully. Midway through the bowl, you pause and listen to the storm. Its voice has changed again. Less violent now, but still forceful. The wind circles the cabin in wide sweeps, gathering snow into new shapes. You take another spoonful and let the warmth settle behind your ribs. You think of how families in similar cabins once shared meals during nights like this, passing bowls, from hand to hand, murmuring stories to settle their nerves. Some of those stories were simple recollections of work or chores. Others wandered into tales shaped by older memories or fears the storm stirred awake. You imagine how the glow of their fires must have cast similar shadows on their walls. You continue eating slowly, letting the quiet between spoonfuls stretch long. The animals remain calm. The goat lets out a soft breath that drifts upward like a tiny cloud. The chickens shift in their hay, making small, sleepy sounds. Their peaceful presence reminds you that winter nights never truly belong to you alone. Everything inside the cabin shares the same warmth, the same worries, the same fragile refuge. As you finish the stew, you set the bowl aside and wipe your hands on a scrap of cloth. The warmth inside you grows more solid now, pushing back the cold that clings to your shoulders. You gather the remaining bread and place it near the fire so it can soften slightly for morning. The clay pot of preserved vegetables remains sealed, untouched for now. Supplies must last through the long stretch of winter, and you feel the responsibility of that in the way your fingers hover over the storage shelf. You stand slowly, quilt still draped around you, and walk toward the window. You wipe a small clearing on the oiled paper, though it reveals nothing beyond the swirling white. You tap the frame lightly with your knuckle. The cold pushes back with a steady pulse. Returning to the bed, you settle beneath the quilts with a deeper sense of calm. Your stomach is warm, your hands no longer ache, and the fire's soft glow feels kinder. You stretch your legs beneath the layers, letting the day's weariness soften into something quieter. With a full belly and the gentle comfort that food always brings in a storm, you breathe more easily. The world outside remains wild, but the world inside the cabin has grown softer, calmer, anchored by a simple meal shared with firelight. You pull the quilts up to your chin, close your eyes, and let your breath fall into a slow, steady rhythm carried quietly by warmth that feels earned. You ease deeper beneath the quilts, your belly pleasantly warm from the stew, and a faint flutter of hunger for comfort rather than food nudges you upright again. Not the kind that aches or insists, but the kind that whispers of something familiar, something grounding, a simple evening meal shared in soft light. You open your eyes to the lantern's steady glow, and the slow rise of smoke weaving upward from the hearth. The cabin feels calmer now, as if it has taken a long breath after the strain of the storm. You sit at the edge of the bed for a moment, letting your mind wander. Evening meals in places like this were never elaborate, but they held a quiet importance. They reassured the body and soothed the nerves, reminding everyone that the day had survived the storm's demands. You feel that same pull now, even after the stew. Something in you wants a small ritual to draw the scattered pieces of the night together. You rise slowly and walk toward the table. Your boots thud lightly on the chilled boards. On the edge of the table sits the clay pot you lifted earlier. Its wax seal shines faintly in the firelight. You touch it gently. Inside lies a mixture of dried apples softened in warm water earlier in the season. You turn it in your hand, remembering how families often dried fruit near stovepipes or attic rafters during autumn, preserving what sweetness they could for long winters. The fruits rarely tasted like fresh harvest by the time midwinter arrived, but they offered a familiar hint of summer that eased the cold's intrusion. You set the pot aside and look toward the shelf where a small jar of honey rests, its surface crystallized into a grainy gold. You tilt the jar in your hand, watching the crystals shift slowly. Many households kept honey not only for sweetness, but as a comfort during harsh storms, believing it warmed the spirit as much as the body. You smile at how the jar, despite its chill, glows warmly in the lantern light. You carry the honey and the dried apples to the hearth and kneel. The fire greets you with a modest wave of heat, enough to soften your skin. You place the clay pot near the coals to warm it gently, then dip a spoon into the jar of crystallized honey. The thick sweetness clings stubbornly reluctant to move in the cold air. You hold the spoon close to the embers until the honey loosens, shimmering like molten amber. You stir a small amount into the warmed apples and watch the mixture thicken slightly. A mellow fragrance curls upward, soft, warm, quietly inviting. You take a small taste. The sweetness spreads across your tongue in a way that feels almost out of place in this harsh night, like a reminder of orchard breezes and sunlit days. You close your eyes and savour it. It is simple, but it lifts something heavy from your chest. As you eat slowly, you think of how evenings once unfolded in similar cabins. Families might sit near the fire, sharing whatever meal remained, exchanging murmured reflections about the day. Sometimes someone would recall a detail from earlier seasons to bring laughter or distract from the storm's weight. The intimacy of those moments often lingered in people's memories more than the meals themselves. A faint crackle from the fire interrupts your thoughts. You glance toward the flames and notice that the wood you added earlier has begun to burn more brightly, creating a steady glow across the room. Shadows sway along the walls in a gentle rhythm. The atmosphere feels safer now, warmer, as if the fire approves of your modest evening ritual. You look toward the goat and chickens. The goat stirs, lifts its head and blinks at you with soft curiosity. You break off a small piece of the sweetened apple and offer it. The goat approaches, cautiously sniffs the air, then takes the offering with a gentle nibble. You smile, rubbing its cheek before letting it return to its hay. The chickens rustle softly, uninterested in the treat, but comforted by the warmth drifting from the hearth. You return to the table with your small bowl and sit. The lantern casts a warm halo around your hands as you finish eating. When the last bite disappears, you rest your palms on the smooth wooden surface and take a moment to appreciate how a simple mixture of fruit and honey can soothe both hunger and unease. There is something timeless in the way such small comforts hold the night together. When you stand again, you stretch your arms upward, letting your spine lengthen. Your back cracks quietly and you sigh with relief. The fire murmurs behind you like an old friend. You walk to the window, feeling the warmth fade from your skin with each step. You lift the lantern and hold it near the oiled paper. The snow pressed against it glows faintly, reflecting the light in tiny glimmers. You rest your forehead lightly against the frame and listen. The storm has softened. The wind, though still strong, no longer lashes wildly at the walls. Its howl has mellowed into a deep, distant hum that steadies itself across the land. You can almost imagine the drifts settling, finding their shape. You breathe in, then out, letting the calmness seep into your shoulders. You return the lantern to its peg and walk back to the bed. The quilts welcome you like familiar arms. You slip beneath them, adjusting the folds around your chest and legs, until the warmth begins to gather again. Your breath forms a faint cloud above you, but the cold feels gentler now, less sharp than earlier. As you settle, you think of how evening meals in winter cabins were rarely grand, but often remembered. They offered a small anchor against the storm, a moment of shared warmth, or in your case tonight, a quiet reassurance that you're still cared for by your own hands. With that thought resting softly inside you, you close your eyes, letting the sweet traces of honey linger on your tongue as warmth spreads slowly across your chest. You drift into a shallow rest, the quilts warm around your shoulders when the storm's voice changes again. The shift is subtle at first, almost like a deep sigh sliding across the cabin roof. You open your eyes slowly. The lantern still glows beside the window, casting a gentle light across the floorboards. The fire flickers in low, steady waves. Everything appears calm, quieter than it has been for hours. But your skin senses something different, a thin shiver in the air that tells you the night has not finished its work. You sit up carefully and listen. The wind no longer slams against the cabin with furious strength. Instead, it rolls in a deeper, slower rhythm as though gathering its breath. You slip from the bed and wrap the quilts around yourself. Your feet meet the cold floor, sending a quick spark of chill up your legs. You walk toward the window, drawn by a feeling you cannot fully describe. When you rest your palm on the frame, the cold feels heavier than before. Not sharper, not louder, but heavier, as if the air beyond the wall has thickened. You lean closer. The snow pressed against the oiled paper has shifted slightly, forming new patterns that look like ripples frozen in place. The snowpack might be settling, reshaping itself under the storm's influence. You touch the paper again and feel a faint vibration. You turn toward the fire, thinking you might add another log when a distant rumble stretches through the night. Not thunder, not shifting branches. Something larger, more collective, like the sound of many snow layers rearranging themselves at once. Winter storms occasionally layered snow in ways that created sudden collapses hours after the last intense gust. Descriptions of such moments appear in regional diaries, though the explanations vary, leaving the actual causes hazy even now. You kneel by the hearth and adjust the embers. As the flames revive, you sense a familiar change in the cabin's atmosphere. The firelight grows unsteady. The shadows wobble on the beams as if stirred by a force you cannot see. You glance upward, watching the rafters faintly tremble. The movement is slight, but enough to pull tension back into your shoulders. The next gust outside arrives with a different voice. Lower, more concentrated. It presses against the walls, not with violence, but with a steady, relentless push, as though the wind itself has become denser. You rise and move toward the door, lifting the latch only enough to feel the pressure. You brace your shoulder lightly against it. The wood resists your touch, as though pushed inward by an unseen hand. Snow must be piled high again outside. You step back from the door, pacing gently across the room, quilts dragging behind you like a long cloak. The fire's orange glow stretches across the wall, illuminating faint patterns in the logs. You pause to study one of the notches near the corner. The wood there bears tiny fractures that spread like thin spider webs. They look harmless enough, but you run your finger along them anyway. Cold can make even strong timber behave unpredictably, and seasoned logs sometimes shift in ways that surprise even experienced builders. You walk toward the animals. The goat rises halfway, stretching its neck and sniffing the air. Its ears flick toward the roof. You kneel beside it, resting your hand on its flank. The warmth helps settle your nerves. The chickens cluster close together, barely moving, except for a few slow breaths. Their calmness means the storm's new rhythm, at least for now, has not reached the intensity that sets them on edge. You stand again and return to the window, driven by the need to understand the storm's latest mood. You lift the lantern and hold it near the paper. The snow pressed against it seems thicker, heavier, almost shining from within. Light refracts through it in tiny sparks like distant stars hidden in frost. You angle the lantern a little higher, and the glow deepens, revealing faint lines where the snowpack has shifted downward. You place your palm against the frame again, and feel something unexpected, the faintest warmth rising from the bottom edge of the window. Not enough to feel comforting, but enough to surprise you. The difference might be nothing more than your internal heat radiating into the cold surface. Or it could signal that the snow outside is compacting, causing layers to shift and press differently against the cabin walls. A few historical descriptions mention such strange temporary warmth during heavy storms, though the reasons behind it remain murky, with explanations ranging from airflow patterns to trapped heat pockets beneath the snow. You lower your hand, unsure what to make of it, but the oddity lingers in your mind. You walk to the centre of the cabin and stand in the pool of lantern light. The air feels slightly thicker here, as if holding its breath. The cold along the floor has deepened again, crawling across your feet through the boards. You lift the quilts higher around your shoulders, hiding your hands inside the folds. Another rumble drifts across the night. This one softer, almost like a long exhale. You glance upward again. The rafters sway in a barely perceptible arc. The storm must be layering its weight across the roof with more patience than before, pushing the snow into ridges that shift in their own slow rhythm. You kneel beside the fire again and add another piece of wood. The flames rise, crackling in sharp bursts. Their brightness pushes back the room's dimness, revealing the soft haze of warmth near the ceiling. You rest your hand on the hearth's edge, grounding yourself as the flames speak quietly with their light. The night feels stretched thin now, like a long ribbon pulled taut between calm and uncertainty. You rise from the hearth and wander back toward the bed, pausing one more time near the window. You leave the lantern hanging on its peg, letting its glow spill across the snow-choked glass. When you slide beneath the quilts, the warmth greets you slowly. You breathe deeply, feeling the fire's gentle presence at your back. The storm presses steadily outside, its voice low, deep and patient. Not gone, not weakened, just changed. You rest your head against the pillow and let the new rhythm guide your breath. Whatever the storm is preparing for you will meet it when it arrives. For now the cabin holds. You lie still beneath the quilts, watching the lantern's soft glow slide across the rafters as the storm continues its quiet rearranging outside. The room feels warmer now, not because the temperature has risen, but because your body has grown accustomed to the cold, steady touch. The fire hums beside you, its glow low and soothing. For a moment you simply breathe and let the softness of the quilts gather around your shoulders, but eventually a small thought tugs at you. The night is not finished. You will need to prepare for sleep properly, not in the restless fits and starts you've managed so far. You shift onto your side and let the quilt settle around your hips. A gentle calm blankets the cabin, but you know better than to trust it fully. Nights like this can quiet themselves just before another burst of winter authority arrives. You ease yourself upright, feeling the straw crinkle softly beneath you. Your hands push through the quilt folds as you rub your face, warming your cheeks. You look toward the hearth where the fire glows like a cluster of hidden jewels among the coals. A thin curl of smoke rises upward before disappearing into the chimney. You stand slowly stepping onto the cold boards with careful feet and pull the quilts around your shoulders like a cloak. You walk toward the woodpile and choose a small dry log for later in the night. The log feels smooth in your palm, its surface firm with age. You kneel by the hearth and place the log near the embers, just close enough to warm without burning. Letting firewood warm before adding it was common practice in homes like this, as it helped the flames catch more quickly when needed. You straighten, stretching your arms above your head. A slight ache runs along your shoulders, the lingering echo of earlier shoveling and the cold's persistent grip. You roll your neck, working out the stiffness, then walk toward the bed again. A thin line of frost has returned to the edge of the quilt, but this time it looks softer, almost delicate. You brush it lightly, watching the crystals melt beneath your touch. You lift the quilt fully and shake it gently to redistribute the warmth trapped inside. The straw beneath the mattress shifts, sending a soft whisper across the room. You smooth the quilt and tuck its edges closer to the wall, forming a barrier against the cold. As you work, you think of how families often piled extra clothing, or even spare boots around the bedding in the dead of winter to block drafts. It was not graceful, but it worked. You wander toward the shelf by the door and lift the small leather pouch you filled earlier with dried lavender. The scent, although faint, carries a calming weight. Some households hung herbs near their beds to soften the smell of smoke and damp wool. You place the pouch near your pillow and breathe in its mild fragrance. With each small touch, you shape the bed into a warmer nest. Yet your thoughts wander toward the roof again. You glance upward, studying the lines of the rafters in the lantern's glow. A thin dusting of frost shimmers along the beams, catching the light like tiny stars. You wonder how much snow has collected above them since your last excursion outside. Early descriptions of winter living mention roofs bearing astonishing loads in deep storms, their survival owed to the steady drying of the logs before construction. Some of those accounts conflict on whether moisture content or construction technique mattered more, leaving the exact secret of durability somewhat unclear. You step to the center of the cabin and listen. The storm's voice has softened into long, sweeping exhalations. The snow outside shifts occasionally with a deep, muffled slide that hints at new drifts forming around the cabin. You hold your breath, waiting for another sound, as moment passes before the wind picks up, gently brushing against the walls with a whisper instead of a growl. You take this calm as your cue. You kneel beside the hearth one more time, adjusting the warming log and nudging the embers gently. The fire will last another hour or two before dipping low. That should be enough to carry your warmth deeper into the night. You stand again, brushing ash from your hands, and cross the room to the bed. The animals stir faintly as you move. The goat coughs once, a soft grunt that resembles a sleepy complaint. The chickens settle deeper into their hay feathers, puffing gently. Their small breaths form subtle rhythms in the dimness. You watch them for a moment, feeling a peculiar sense of companionship rise in your chest. You return to your bed and slip beneath the quilts. The warmth gathers immediately, especially around your torso. You pull the lavender pouch closer to your face, letting its quiet scent mingle with the lingering fragrance of wood smoke. Your limbs stretch beneath the covers, finding the most comfortable arrangement the narrow mattress allows. You close your eyes. The fire's glow dances faintly along the cabin walls. The storm breathes softly. The weight of the quilts holds you gently in place. Your own breath settles into a slow, even rhythm. Preparing for sleep in a cabin like this is part ritual, part necessity. Every adjustment, the fire, the quilts, the small personal comfort serves to protect you from the cold that lies in every corner of the room. But it is not only the cold you prepare against. It is the quiet unpredictability of winter nights, the subtle shifts in air and structure. The knowledge that rest must be carved carefully from the storm's ever-changing mood. You tuck your chin deeper beneath the quilts, letting the warmth wrap around your ears. The lantern flickers lightly, then steadies. The fire hums, the animals breathe, and for the first time in hours you feel sleep approach without resistance. It comes gently, not in a sudden rush, but in slow, soft steps, like someone placing warm hands over your shoulders. You surrender to it without fear, trusting the cabin to hold the night at bay for a little while longer. You drift for a while, eyes closed, letting the quiet rhythm of the cabin press softly against your senses. When you finally open your eyes again, the air feels different. Not warmer, not exactly calmer, but lighter somehow. As though something in the night has shifted ever so slightly toward release. You lift your head from the pillow, listening closely. The storm speaks with a gentler voice now. The long battering gusts have faded into slow, steady breaths that glide across the roof instead of striking it. You sit up beneath the quilts, blinking away a thin layer of frost that formed along the edge during your last bit of rest. The fire glows low but steady. A faint halo rises from the embers, enough to stretch faint warmth across the room. You slip from the bed, feet touching the cold boards with the familiar sting, and tighten the quilts around your shoulders. You walk slowly toward the hearth. The animals shift in their corner, the goat stretches and shakes its coat softly, while the chickens ruffle their feathers with tiny murmurs. They sense the same change you feel. You kneel by the fire and stir the embers. The coals brighten instantly, glowing like warm jewels under the thin layer of ash. You feed them a small piece of kindling, then a thicker bit of wood. Flames rise, gradually curling around the new log with delicate tongues. The fire's renewed crackle warms your breath as you lean in. When you rise, you walk toward the window. Frost has grown thick on the inside, creating itty-bitty patterns that resemble fern leaves pressed against glass. You brush your knuckle along the surface and wipe a tiny patch clear. Outside, the world glimmers faintly beneath a sky that seems almost pale, almost ready to brighten. The snow sits high against the cabin walls, leaning like a heavy blanket stitched into the earth. Some old notes from rural families mention how storms often quieted themselves like this just before daybreak, though the exact timing varied from region to region, leaving no consistent rule across their collected stories. You step back from the window and breathe in deeply. The air carries a hint of warmth from the fire, but its edges remain sharp enough to remind you that winter still holds the land tightly. You tighten your quilt and move toward the door, driven by quiet curiosity. When you press your hand against the wood, it feels less strained than earlier, less burdened by the storm's weight. You lean closer and listen. No pounding gusts, no frantic rattles, just wind shifting across a landscape reshaped by the night. You turn around and walk slowly across the room, The wood floor creaks softly under your steps. A tiny drift of snow you carried inside earlier has melted near the door, leaving a patch of glistening wetness on the boards. The lantern remains on its peg, casting warm arcs across the walls. Its glow reflects off the frost clinging to your quilts, creating a faint sparkle in the dim air. You move toward the animals once more. The goat nudges your hand, gently seeking a touch. His breath warms your fingers. You stroke its cheek, feeling the coarse softness of its winter coat. A pale patch of hay clings to its shoulder. The chickens hop once or twice, shaking off their drowsiness as the fire brightens the room. Their presence is grounding, a reminder that life inside the cabin pushes onward, even when the world outside feels swallowed in white silence. You stand again and stretch your arms, letting your shoulders soften. A memory drifts into your mind, an old description from a traveller who once wrote about waking after a heavy storm to see the world transformed into a silent, luminous expanse. The traveller believed such mornings carried a particular kind of luck, though the idea never reached universal acceptance among others who lived through similar winters. You smile faintly at the uncertainty of such traditions. Morning often felt magical after a storm, but whether that magic belonged to weather survival or imagination is something each person understood differently. You step toward the hearth again and sit on the small stool, letting the fire warm your knees. The flames grow steadily brighter as the new log takes hold. Shadows dance on the rafters, shifting like gentle waves rolling across the ceiling. You lift your hands toward the heat and close your eyes, briefly savouring the warmth as it spreads across your palms. The storm outside drifts into true quiet. Snow settles into stillness. Wind carries only a faint whisper. The night eases toward morning, though darkness still holds a few more hours. You rise from the stool and walk back to the bed. As you settle beneath the quilts, your body relaxes fully for the first time since the storm began. Your bones feel heavy with the memory of shoveling repairing drafts, watching the fire tending to the animals and coaxing warmth through the night. Yet you feel safe here, wrapped in the layered heartbeat of winter and fire. You tuck the quilts under your chin, letting the soft weight soothe you. The cold still lingers around the edges of the room, but the bed feels steady and warm. You close your eyes and let the last breaths of the storm pass gently around you. Morning will come soon enough, and with it the slow unveiling of a world reborn in white. For now you rest. Let the storm fade now, softening into the far edges of your memory. Picture yourself lying safely within that sturdy log cabin, firelight dimming into gentle embers, quilts pulled around your shoulders like a warm embrace. The world outside is blanketed in deep, unbroken snow, and the wind that once roared now drifts in quiet, measured sighs. Everything heavy has eased. Everything sharp has softened. Let your thoughts become slower, gentler, drifting like thin curls of smoke rising from the hearth. No tasks wait for you. No drafts sneak beneath the door. The walls around you hold strong and steady, warmed by the fire you tended through the long night. You're sheltered, cocooned, and supported by the soft glow of dawn preparing itself beyond the frosted window. Breathe slowly. Feel the weight of your body sink deeper into the straw mattress. Notice the subtle warmth trapped beneath the blankets, the faint scent of wood smoke lingering in the air. Imagine the animals in their quiet corner resting easily, now their gentle breaths thick and slow. Everything that needed your care tonight has been cared for. Everything that asked for your strength has been answered. The cabin stands calm. The storm has passed. The silence outside is no longer threatening but soothing, like a soft white ocean stretching to the horizon. You're safe inside your circle of warmth, safe inside your own quiet breath, safe inside the story you have travelled through. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the cabin fade into a warm blur. Let morning arrive at its own slow pace while you drift peacefully into rest. Sweet dreams.